IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. And we're going to call this Championship Week kickoff, Trev. We are kicking off our coverage of the national championship game between the Ohio State Buckeyes and your Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Guys, oh man, what a week, Trev. What a week. We're going to have a lot for people. We're going to go live at least every day except possibly Sunday. We're going to be live, including next Monday. A lot of stuff in store for y'all this week. I'm excited about it. I know Trev is excited about it. We're sitting there chomping at the bit. Just want to give you guys a quick rundown on what we're going to discuss this week and then today. So that way everybody knows we're going to be going live at 1 o'clock every day during the week, Monday to Friday. Saturday will probably be 1 o'clock as well, but, weekends are always a little bit different, so we'll let you guys know. Today, we're going to talk about, we're just going to kind of kick off what this game means, right? What's at stake for Notre Dame, what this game means in a lot of different ways. We'll dive into our first look at Ohio State. We're going to talk also about the new portal pickups today. We're going to do a much deeper dive into the portal players after the season is over, but we are going to give a little bit of a breakdown of the guys that they got this past week, I should say. And tomorrow, our focus is going to be strictly on the offense, Notre Dame defense against the Ohio State offense. We'll kind of preview the Ohio State offense, talk about their players, their stats, where they rank. We'll get into how they stack up against the Notre Dame defense. We'll probably talk some different personnel aspects of it. Wednesday, we'll flip it. We'll talk about the Notre Dame offense and the Ohio State defense. We'll break those aspects of it down. Thursday, we'll do sort of our 5 reasons why we believe Notre Dame is going to win, what are our biggest concerns, and then we'll talk game records. And then Friday, we're going to sort of do a little special segment. Right now, it's matchups that matter. We may talk a little bit about that those next 2 days and then throw something else in there if there's some news that's come up. And then we will do a buy, sell, hold. So Friday we'll have a short little segment at the beginning, and then we'll do a buy, sell, hold. So Salty, if you're listening, Wednesday, you could actually put it up Wednesday, dude, and then we'll get a ton of them on there. We're going to do a special buy, sell, hold instead of a mailbag. And then Saturday, we plan on doing our Keys to Victory show and our prediction show on Saturday. Right now, we don't have anything planned for Sunday. We wanted to leave a day for things that may come up, or if nothing comes up, we may need a day of rest. We may need a Sabbath this week of breakdowns. And then, of course, Monday we'll do a pregame show. We'll sort of do a deep, like we did, before the playoff games. We'll do that. We'll do a postgame show. Contemplating doing something during the game. I haven't decided on that yet. And then, of course, on Tuesday we'll do upon further review. So these next 9 days, Trevor, are going to be jam-packed with nothing but Notre Dame against Ohio State, and I cannot wait for it. And we'll kick things off with this, Trevor, looking at this matchup. And here's something that I said, and I want to talk about this to begin. I said this on Twitter the day after the game. I wrote an article about it. And this is where we're going to kind of kick things off. What you have in the championship game are the 2 best teams in college football. And what I mean by that, I do not mean this. I do not mean, well, of course they did what they needed to do, and they're here because they're so clear they're 2. No, like when the Giants beat the Patriots and was the second Super Bowl that they beat the Patriots, and they were like 9-7. They were the hottest team in the NFL. They weren't the best team in the NFL. And the best teams don't always win or play for the championship. And when I mean best, I'm talking about who were the best teams over the course of the entire season. Obviously, they were the 2 best in the postseason. That's why they got there. And neither team got the benefit of someone else doing the dirty work for them. Like, they didn't get the benefit of somebody else knocking off Oregon for Ohio State or Arizona State upsetting Texas. And so they didn't have to play Oregon and Texas. They didn't get the benefit of Notre Dame didn't get the benefit of Boise obviously they had to play Georgia in round 2. They didn't get the benefit of getting Boise State in their second round the way that Penn State did. They also didn't get the benefit of Boise State upsetting Penn State. So then after Georgia, you don't have to play Boise. You don't have to play Penn State, which, let's be honest, would have been a much easier – not much. It would have been an easier game for Notre Dame to win if it was Boise State instead of Penn State. They both had to earn their way here. Both teams also had one bad day. in the season. Michigan with their embarrassing loss to an 8-win Michigan Ohio State with their embarrassing loss to an 8-win Michigan team that honestly wasn't very good. And of course, Notre Dame losing early in the season to a Northern Illinois team they had no business losing to. Outside of that, these are the two most dominant teams of college football. Both rank in the top 12 in scoring offense. Notre Dame is one of only 3 teams, along with Indiana and Ole Miss, to rank in the top 10 in both scoring offense and scoring defense. Ohio State's just outside of it. Ohio State has the number 1 scoring defense in college football. Notre Dame has the number 2 scoring defense in college football. Notre Dame is 1 and 2, and Ohio State are 1 and 2 in the Football Power Index. They're 1 and 2 in the Fermo Efficiency Index, and they're 1 and 2 in the Sagarin ratings, which takes a look at like all the efficiency numbers. Over the course of the season, these are the 2 best teams. They didn't have the 2 best resumes, which is why they were the 7 seed and the 8 seed. But these are the 2 best teams all season. And I think it's fitting that in the first year of a 12-team playoff, we're actually getting what I believe to be over the course of from the August 31st until now, what were the 2 best teams in college football outside of them both having one really bad day. And I think that is exciting. And it's also exciting that Notre Dame is part of that, where they are genuinely looking and say, hey, look, now this triggered some Penn State fans who still think Penn State's better and others. But I think there's no doubt about it, Trev, when this game kicks off, whoever wins, whoever loses, these are the 2 best teams in college football. There's no Cinderella TCU. There's no upset story. These are the 2 best teams in college football.
Yeah, I don't think there's any better way that you could draw this up, right? Like we've been talking this week a lot about parallels, right? Brian, you and I have talked about that a lot, and just the similarities that both of these teams have gone through, right? Both had transfer portal quarterbacks in the offseason that they picked up, both with question marks, right? There was a lot of speculation around each defense, like how good they were going to be. I don't mean speculation in a bad way, right? Ohio State, they lose Marvin Harrison Jr. and they lose a couple of offensive linemen to the draft. And, it's like, what's this going to look like for them? And very similar conversations around Notre Dame. They lose Joe Alt. They lose Blake Fisher, right? They had a mass wave of wide receivers enter the transfer portal. So they lost some offensive weapons as well. So yeah, there's a lot of talk around what these 2 teams were going to look like. And the reason why I'm so happy that this year went to a 12-team format is there was always so much speculation around, of course, teams 5 and 6 were, we could have competed for a national championship. And the resounding answer is always, well, I mean, obviously not, because you weren't one of the top 4 deserving teams in the country, right? But I think one thing that this playoff showed is you don't have to be a top 4 deserving team in the country to play for a playoff. You have to play well in the postseason. That's what these 2 teams did. And I think there's no better way to kick off the 12-team format than with these 2 teams, right? 2 teams that in a 4-team playoff, those losses to Northern. Now, there's a lot of conversation around what would have happened with Notre Dame in a 4-team playoff. I'm under the assumption that they still would have been in it because their bad loss was early. But you look at Ohio State, you lose to a Michigan team like that in the final week of the regular season, and you don't play in your conference championship. That's a death sentence. Mm-hmm. You're out of the 14 playoff, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no different path of maybe this team could lose and you could sneak in. And so I'm happy that the way the 12-team playoff format is, we talked about it a lot at the start of the year, is the great thing about the playoffs is if you think you deserve a spot in the national championship in the semifinals, you now have the opportunity to go out and prove it on the football field. And Ohio State and Notre Dame did both of that. So, dude, I mean, we loaded into the show and I said, how good it feels that the title of the show is National Championship Review.
With Notre Dame in it.
With Notre Dame.
We were going to do a national championship preview no matter what. It was just nice to be one that's dedicated towards Notre Dame in there and championship preview. I mean, Trev, to your point, like there's been a narrative that like neither one of these teams would have made a 14 playoff, and I'm like, no, that's I think a flawed argument. Well, they weren't ranked in the top 4. You're projecting something onto the committee that they didn't have to deal with. The committee didn't have to make the decision of, do we drop one of the conference championship teams out of the top 4? They didn't have to, because of the format of the 12-team playoff, because 2 conference champions were going to raise above them anyway. So you had Oregon 1, Georgia 2. They were fine. Those 2 teams deserved the 1 and 2 seeds based on the current format. And then you knew that 3 and 4, seeded teams were going to be somebody that won a conference championship, and there was no need to kind of finagle that. we have seen in the past that if a team was 4 and lost their conference championship or had some sort of injury, they would have dropped out. We don't know how the committee would have handled Carson Beck's injury in a 14 playoff, because in a 14 playoff, there is no automatic bid. We don't know that Georgia would have still been in with Carson Beck's obvious. I mean, the committee knew that he was out. They didn't have to consider that in this. Like, I kept seeing a lot of Florida State fans being like, well, Carson, is the committee going to stand true to their word and not put Georgia in? Like, they left. Oh, guys, you do realize they won their conference championship, right? Like, they're kind of in. It's apples to oranges. I think Notre Dame probably gets in at 4 over Penn State in a 4-team playoff, but Ohio State doesn't get in. And again, that's part of the give and take you have to have. So some people say, well, this shows that the regular season doesn't matter because Ohio State could lose to Michigan and Notre Dame could lose to Northern Illinois and still get in. And my answer is there's always give and take. There is nothing that's perfect. But the amount of games that mattered in November at the time is so much greater than before that I'm willing to accept the fact that an Ohio State can lose to a Michigan. Because here's the thing. They can lose to Michigan all they want, but they still had to win 3 games over good teams, over the number 9 seed, over the number 1 seed, and over the number 5 seed to get in, who was the 4th-ranked team. So they had to earn their way here, just like Notre Dame. Yes, okay, you lost to Notre Dame. You shouldn't have been in. Okay, well, we're going to have to prove that we belonged in if you're Notre Dame, because we've got to be the top 10 Indiana team, number 2 Georgia, and number 3 Penn State. And if you can do that, then you deserve to play for a title, and these 2 teams did, which is further evidence that over the course of the season, what we're getting this title game is the teams that have always been the 2 best teams of college football in 2024.
When I go back through and I think of the journey of both teams, it is crazy how they got here. But I think the one thing is common, and I think that any rational fan on either side, any rational fan on either side can admit that these 2 teams deserve to be in the spot that they're in, right? Like, there's a lot of conversation on both sides about who lost to who and who had the better schedule. And look, when playoff times roll around, you have the opportunity to win 3 games to make it to this spot, which both Ohio State and Notre Dame did. Neither of them got the benefit of the doubt of getting a bye week, so they didn't have one additional game that they didn't have to play. And Brian, you just rattled off the 6 opponents that the teams combined to beat to get here.
And there were people picking against both of them in the first round.
Yeah.
There were I'm not doing this to call you out, Trevor. I'm just saying, you weren't alone in thinking Ohio State was done after Michigan. Like, that team is going to quit. They want their coach fired. They fought harder about a flag being planted than they did for the 60 minutes of the game. There was a lot of people picking against them. There were people picking against Notre Dame against Indiana.
Yeah.
I don't know if they can do this, if they can do that. And obviously a lot of people picked against Notre Dame against against Georgia. And there was obviously people that, it's not many, but some people that picked against Ohio State against Oregon. So it's not like they had these really clean pass and everybody just knew they were going to win the games they had to win to get there. There's a lot of people that doubted Ohio State's ability to beat Tennessee. There's a lot of people that doubted Notre Dame's ability to beat Georgia. And they handled business. And they handled business impressively. That's the other thing, too, is like the Penn State game was the only competitive game that Notre Dame's played. I mean, maybe USC. But again, Notre Dame never trailed against USC. This is the most competitive game they've had since, this is the first time they've trailed by double digits all season. Ohio State was in a dogfight until the very end of this game. They were in a battle. So, I mean, they both kind of cruised in the first couple rounds to get here. So again, Trev, it's not like everybody just, of course Ohio State's going to be there. People jumped on that bandwagon really quick after the Tennessee game, but there was a lot of people that thought Ohio State was toast coming into that matchup against Tennessee. And then Ohio State was like, hey, we had a bad day. That's it. We're still Ohio State. Notre Dame, hey, you don't belong here. You lost Northern Illinois. Hey, we lost Northern Illinois. I get it, but we're still Notre Dame. And we're still one of the 2 best teams in college football. And then they spent the next 3 months proving it. You think about this. Ohio State has 13 wins. Notre Dame has 14 wins. 11 of Ohio State's wins were by double digits. 12 of Notre Dame's wins were by double digits. So they both only had 2 games this year that they won that were not by double digits. I mean, again, Trev, every metric you want to look at, every efficiency number, this is not any team that kind of backed in and lucked in because Bama got in 2012 because Kansas State lost late and Oregon lost. And you know what I mean? This isn't any of those. These are the two teams that through the course of the season proved that they were the best teams in college football. And that's what makes us great. We're going to get a champion that earned it. And I think that's the beauty of this new playoff format. And again, I'll remind people, I was not on board when this first came out. I was not on board with the 12-team playoff. But I was wrong. It was great. It was great for college football. It was great for the regular season. The playoff has been great. The only thing that's been bad about the playoff is the coverage of it by ESPN. And they're harping on who should or shouldn't have gotten in. I mean, they're the ones that kind of took some of the shine off of the first round of the playoff, to be honest with you. So I mean, we're getting the two best teams. And I think that's the most important part to focus on. Now, who's the best? We're going to find that out in a week from now. We're going to find out who the best team is. Is it Ohio State? Is it Notre Dame? We're going to find that out. But I think we can feel good about saying we are getting the two best teams in college football this season. I also find it interesting, Trevor, that in the last 2 years, the most Southern team to play for the national championship in the last 2 years is Ohio State. So is the North rising in college football, man? And in a lot of ways it is. I mean, we're going to talk about why that is in the offseason. But, I mean, that's where we're at. And honestly, as someone from the North who, grew up in Ohio, of course, I think that's how it should be. But, it's going to be great. And also, Trev, too, the storylines for this game are going to be amazing. There's so many unique storylines about this game that make it look even better.
Yeah, man, it's awesome to hear. No matter who wins, right, whether it's Ohio State or whether it's Notre Dame, the national championship in back-to-back years will come from the North, which I know just have to really bother some of our friends down south who believe that football runs through the South. And like, look, from a recruiting standpoint, like a high school standpoint, like there is some truth to that. Like I understand that. Yeah. Right. But, it's refreshing, because obviously Notre Dame, Ohio State are not sympathizers to the SEC in the slightest. And we hear every single offseason about how football runs through the South and you have to get through, the Alabamas of the world, the Georgias of the world, the Texases of the world, if you want to be considered elite. And Notre Dame and Ohio State did that. They got through Georgia. They got through Texas to get to this standpoint. And so now I think you can have a healthy conversation in the offseason around you have to go through Notre Dame. You have to go through Ohio State. You have to go through like a Penn State who played in the semifinals, right? To get to the upper echelon now of college football. So the narrative switching a little bit is a really, really fun topic to talk about, man.
It is. And as Archer pointed out, I mean, the two best teams in the SEC this year both got beat by these two teams in the playoff. Mm-hmm. And Alabama, the team that everybody thought should be in, got beat by Michigan in a bowl game. South Carolina, another team that everybody thought should have been in, got beat by Illinois. So it is interesting how it's all played out, Trevor. But for this season, we have the two best teams. The Texas very clearly wasn't one of the two best teams in college football. They were very good. Don't get me wrong. Georgia was very good. Penn State was very good. And every team in college football is flawed. Everyone, including these two teams, right? And neither one of these teams are, to me, beating 19 LSU. Neither one of these teams are beating 2018 Clemson. Although, well, I think these two teams would have a better shot against 2018 Clemson than they would 19 LSU. But you get the point that I'm making. They're not beating, 0-1 Miami. And those type of things, but they're the two teams that have played the best, that have been able to overcome the most. And it is interesting. It's two more teams that are built very similarly. And what I mean by that is, Trevor, is Ohio State really relied on impact portal guys, just like Notre Dame has relied on impact portal guys. But it's about impact, not volume. Ohio State doesn't have a lot of portal guys in their starting lineup. They have some. A couple of them are injured. Josh Simmons is injured. He was a transfer pickup a year ago. Seth McLaughlin is injured. They're All-American center they got from Alabama. But obviously Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard are two portal pickups. Caleb Downs is a portal pickup. Davidson Igbenogson was a portal pickup. But their impact guys, there's not a lot of them. A majority of their roster is still homegrown. right? I mean, a lot of the replacements for these injured offensive linemen are homegrown. All their receivers are homegrown guys. Their tight end is a homegrown guy. Travion Henderson is a homegrown guy. I think their entire starting defensive line are all homegrown guys. They have some rotation guys that were transfers. Kenyatta Jackson was a transfer, I believe. Tywone Malone was a transfer guy. They've gotten some transfers in. I'm not saying they haven't, but they're still primarily built through high school recruiting and then development. Notre Dame, same way. Notre Dame's not playing for a national championship this year if they don't go get Riley Leonard. They're just not. And you look at the impact he's had on his football team. You look at the impact that the Nick Jordan Clark and RJ Oben against Georgia, and you look at my bad, Kenyatta Jackson was a high school recruit for them. You look at some other guys that they've got. I mean, obviously the portal's been good to Notre Dame. You know, Rod Hurd had a big sack in this game. Mitch Jeter was a portal pickup. Both teams have to me handled building your roster the right way. Is we're going to fill needs through the portal. And sometimes it's going to be an impact player. Sometimes it's a depth guy like a Malone and a Jackson, guys like that for Ohio State. It's a Rod Hurd or an RJ Oben, and Notre Dame's receivers have obviously been complementary players, not stars. But it's still about recruiting and developing your own rosters. I still think that's the best way to do it. And I think when you look at 3 of the 4 teams in the playoff, they were heavily homegrown rosters. Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. I think Texas has probably had the most volume of guys that are playing that were portal guys, that are impact guys. I mean, Matthew Golden was an impact guy. Silas Bolden, it was a transfer. Silas Bolden was a transfer. Quinn Ewers is a transfer. Andrew Makoba was a you know what I'm talking about. Makuba, is a transfer. They got Trey Moore. They've had a lot of those type of guys. So I think that's the other thing is that we're seeing about this game when you talk about what's at stake. I think what these two teams have both shown, so no matter who wins, I think there's going to be a narrative about how the transfer players impacted those teams, and I think it's a fair narrative. Like a lot of people were upset after the Georgia game when ESPN talked about how Notre Dame's portal guys were a big reason for they won, and they're like, well, you know, and I'm like, guys, it was true. I mean, you look at what Riley Leonard did. Bo Collins caught a touchdown. Mitch Jeter nailed 2 field goals. RJ Oben had the huge strip sack at the end of the game. It's okay to say that they've done that. And I understood some of the frustration. And if Ohio State wins, there will be the focus on the Will Howards and the Caleb Downs and the Quinshon Judkins. But there needs to be a point made that the proper way to build a roster is not to be homegrown only the way that Dabo Swinney did. There's going to be times when you need to plug holes in your roster, and you've got to be willing to plug them. But the primary way to still build your roster is to bring in the Riley Leonards and the RJ Obens and the Jordan Clarks, and next year the Malachi Fields and those type of guys, and the Caleb Downses and the Quinshon Judkins and those guys. Bring them into a culture that is already established, and make sure you're bringing in guys that have bought in. Did you ever at any point in time watch Will Howard or Caleb Downs this year and think they weren't bought into the Ohio State way of doing things? No. Did you ever feel that way about Riley Leonard or Bo Collins or Chris Mitchell or Jordan Clark? No. But when you are revamping your entire roster with portal guys, it's a lot harder to get that buy-in. And I think that's something else that these two teams have shown, Trevor, by them getting to this stage. I do believe that Notre Dame and Ohio State are also showing there's a right way to build your team, and it's this way. Use the portal for impact, not volume. Build through high school recruiting and developing a culture from the time they arrive. Those are the big keys to me, Trev, that when you talk about what we're going to learn from this game, I think that's a very important ingredient that both of these teams and Penn State have lived by.
Yeah, man, it's an and, not an or. And that's how I view the transfer portal, right? The transfer portal is a very polarizing topic, right? Paying players and using the transfer portal and how many players jump in at first opportunity, how many decide to stay. And then you have still a few of like the OG type coaches, like the Dabo Sweeneys of the world, who believe it's like, no, like we trust in our guys, which you have to have both, right? You feel the immediate needs with transfer portals, which is exactly what Ohio State and Notre Dame did. But the basis of your team is still through high school recruiting and the pipelines that you've created in the offseason through different relationships in different high schools. So, you know, there's a lot of similarities between these two teams, right? And we're going to talk about it all week long. But You look at, some of the injury issues that they've had along the offensive line. Both Ohio State and Notre Dame have had those issues, right? You look at the defensive coordinators. Al Golden and Jim Knowles are both going into their third year as defensive coordinators, and it's showing, right? All of those players on either side of the football are playing with clear minds. They are playing with a lot of velocity. They have a good understanding of the scheme that they're in. Both teams are highlighted by, I just labeled them like newcomers, right? Like transfer portal and incoming freshmen. For the offensive side of the football, you look at Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. And I mean, he's a true freshman. Kid's 19 years old, and he was number 2 in receiving yards in the Big Ten and number 1 in receiving touchdowns. Then you look at the Notre Dame defensive side of the football. Newcomer Leonard Moore, he wasn't a transfer portal kid, but he comes in, steps in for Benjamin Morris, and is now playing at an extremely high level in the playoffs.
Both freshman All-Americans.
Right. And then obviously all the transfer portal additions for either team that you had mentioned too. So to me, these teams are built and they are highlighted by, not built by, they are highlighted by some of the newcomers, whether it be true freshmen but at the end of the day.
And offensive coordinators.
Yep. But at the end of the day, when both teams started experiencing issues, right, with injuries and with shuffling lineups, who did they rely on? It was the kids that have been a part of these programs, respectively, for years, right? Notre Dame starts having injuries on defense. Who did they start relying on? They didn't turn to R.J. Oben and say, hey, dude, what do we got? Like it was, hey, Howard Cross, Jack Kaiser, Xavier Watts, what do you got for us? For Ohio State, it's like, hey, there's some shuffling going around. There's some injuries on the offensive and defensive side. Who do they turn to? Emeka Egbuka, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, like guys that have been a part of each of these programs for years. And I think that's just another facet of this game that makes it all the more interesting because it isn't the one or the other, it's the both. It's not we're just only recruiting high school kids or we are building solely through the portal and getting every single big name and throwing a bag at them. You look at the numbers and like nil value that each team is like dishing out and distributing. They're relatively equal, right? So you just go through and you look, and it's really exciting. I think Notre Dame and Ohio State have modeled perfectly how you're supposed to utilize the portal and continue to build your team through high school recruiting. So a lot of fun storylines in this one, man. It's a lot of fun.
And then, of course, you have the Marcus Freeman playing against his alma mater. We're not going to focus a whole lot on that because I don't know that that's necessarily something that's going to impact the game at all. Mm-hmm. Just like we didn't focus a lot on Al Golden going against his alma mater last week. Right. We'll mention it because it is a cool storyline, but it's not something that's going to have a huge impact on the game, in my opinion. But, I mean, look, you have two teams with a lot of talent. You have two teams with very good coaching. You have two teams that have had to overcome adversity to get here. And Ohio State had to do it twice. I mean, Ohio State lost twice this year, and they had to bounce back both times. And I think they bounced back better the second time than they did the first time. And certainly have played good football. So I'm excited about it, Trevor. I think this is the matchup that I wanted. I mean, you and I talked about this. There's two schools of thought to Notre Dame winning a championship, and I would have been okay with either one of them because it would have meant Notre Dame winning a championship, right? And it was one is, hey, look, some teams knock these guys off and you don't actually have to play the top teams, and maybe you get the Arizona State, Boise State path or something like that. Or, hey, look, you got to beat the best teams. And I think the final piece when you look at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, Trev, and also from an Ohio State standpoint, but obviously we're a Notre Dame channel, so we care more about the Notre Dame standpoint on this is, would I have enjoyed a national championship no matter who it is? Sure. If I had to pick one, and I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I'm saying if they're going to win it, you look at it and say there's going to be no excuses from anyone. You can try, but it won't fly because they would have had to beat Georgia, who all of you thought was going to beat Notre Dame. And everybody talked about all of Georgia's flaws after the game. Not a lot of people were talking about them before the game. A lot of people talked about how good Penn State was, and Drew Aller played bad, and had nothing to do with Notre Dame's core, defense. Like it's total coincidence. But you also then go beat Ohio State, who's playing they're playing the best. They've been the most impressive team in the postseason, in my opinion. Yeah. And there's no excuses. And to me, that's more satisfying because that reminds me of the championship I remember as a kid. Like to win in 88, you didn't like, okay, well, shoot, we don't have Miami on the schedule this year, so we had an easier path. You had to beat, number 2 Miami. You had to beat number 4 Michigan. Think about it. Notre Dame that year beat four top 10 teams. Michigan was top 10. They were number 3, I think, or 9 when they played. They ended up in the top 5. USC was ranked number 2 when they played. They had to beat Miami, who finished year number 2, was ranked number 1 when they played. They had to beat West Virginia, who finished in the top 5. Like that's what you want to be. What do you say all the time? To be the man, you got to beat the man. And who have we said of those tier 1 teams? It's Bama, it's Georgia, it's Ohio State. It was Clemson. I don't think they're a tier 1 program anymore. It's been 5 years since they won their last title. It's been more than 5 years since they won their last title. So I kind of knocked them out. And they're not playing. Ohio State hasn't won a title in over 10 years, but they're still that elite program where Clemson has not been for several years now. So it's those are the 3 teams. Texas is trying to prove they belong on that tier, and they showed in the playoff and in the SEC title game that they're not there yet. And Notre Dame has proven that they're to me they're on that level. This is the way you kick the door down and let everybody know that it's a done deal. There's no more conversation about it. It's a done deal, and that's what's at stake. So like you said, so many great storylines. So 2 very teams built similarly. In regard to how they were constructed. They're not similar in how they go about their business on the field. We'll talk about that over the next several days. But as far as the philosophy of building your team, I think has certainly shown that they have very similar philosophies to each other. And so it's going to be an absolute blast, Trev, an absolute blast. And reminder, obviously, the game is going to be on Monday. It's going to be at 7:30 Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN. It's being played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And Ohio State comes into this game as a favorite, which is to be expected. I'll be honest, I was a little surprised it was as big as it was.
Yeah.
9.5, but it's already come down to 8. And I expect it to probably go down just a little bit more. But I think we're kind of in the range where it's going to be. I think it's going to be between like 7 to 8.5 now as it moves a little bit over the next week. And honestly, Ohio State should be the favorite right now. I mean, they're playing the best football at the time. They beat number 1, right? I mean, Notre Dame beat number 2, but Ohio State beat number 1, and I'm totally fine with that. So, but that's a little bit about the matchup, Trev. We're going to dive into more of the Notre Dame opportunity here next, but we just had to kick things off with that. It's such an exciting time to be a Notre Dame fan. It's got to be an exciting time to be an Ohio State fan. I wouldn't know. I'm an Ohio State fan. But I know my family's pretty fired up about this, and so it's a great matchup. 2 Northern powerhouses, 2 blue bloods. I mean, that's the thing is we can debate, is this team a blue blood? Is that team a blue blood? There's no doubt that these 2 teams are.
Yeah, man. I mean, you go through and you look and you talk about how historic each of these programs are, which is another reason why this national championship just feels right. You know what I mean? Like yes, I understand some of our friends down south might not agree so, but it is, right? You have 2 programs who have combined for 19 national titles, 52 bowl wins, 1,939 all-time wins, and 14 Heisman Trophy winners. Each team has 7, right? And so you look at that and you look at like what's the rest of it? You take the names out of it, right? You take Notre Dame, you take Ohio State out of it, and you look at what do you want to see out of a national championship? You want 2 storied programs that fought to get there. I think that's a big key. Like you don't want 2 storied programs that one of them kind of like backed their way in and had the easier path in the playoff. And, those narratives can kind of be eliminated. But that to me is what I think is fantastic. It's 2 blue-blooded programs that have proven really solid over the history of college football. And it makes for a lot of fun, man. This is going to be so fun to cover.
It should be noted, Trevor, that coming into the semifinals, Ohio State was number 2 all-time in wins in college football history. Notre Dame was tied for 4th with Texas. Notre Dame now owns number 4 all by themselves in all-time wins. So I just wanted to point that out to people, just as a reminder that's where we're at. So Notre Dame is now very much creeping up on Alabama and Michigan for the all-time win percentage as well. This season helped with that. They're at 7.32. Actually, they're a little higher than 7.32 because of the most recent game. And Michigan and Alabama are tied at number 2 at 7.33. Ohio State's number 1 all-time at 7.35. So, again, it just backs up the notion that these are 2 of the all-time greats. And, It's a classic. It's where you want to be. And as a kid who grew up in Northwest Ohio, as a Notre Dame fan, and my entire family was Ohio State fans. I have one cousin. My cousin Angie's a Michigan fan, and I don't know how that happened. Fortunately, my Uncle Marty still loves her, right? He still calls her his daughter, so he hasn't disowned her. But she got all to talk all that mess last year, and I know that he's hoping to talk all that mess this year. And I'm hoping that I get to go back home for family reunions and talk all that mess. So we'll see how it goes, but just great game. I anticipate this being a very good game between two very good football teams, and that's how I expect it to be. So that's part one of today's show, guys. Just sort of an overview of this game. Reminder before we get the next part, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and be ready this week, folks. Make sure you carve out some time because we are going live every day, Monday to Friday, actually Monday to Saturday for sure. May end up going, Trev, by the time we get to Sunday, we're going to be, man, there's still so much to talk about. Let's do it. But that's where we're going to be for these next 6 days. So make sure, buckle up, be ready for it. We're going to have a lot of fun this week, and we're just getting started even on today's show. So part two, Trev, is we do this every week. We talk about what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game. And there's the obvious one. Oh, they can be national champions. All right, cool. We got that. But what would it mean for Notre Dame? And we'll talk a little bit about what it would mean for Ohio State also at the end, but we're going to focus obviously on Notre Dame because we're a Notre Dame channel. But what would this game mean for Notre Dame? And I think there's a lot of different layers to this. And the biggest one is, we talked about before, is this puts Notre Dame on the level of the premier teams of college football. And what we mean by that is, if we're talking history, Notre Dame is in the top group. It's Notre Dame, it's Alabama, it's Michigan, and it's Ohio State. That is the four cream of the crop, top board blue bloods, and it's not really close. There's nobody else that is really, in my opinion, in that group. With all due respect to Oklahoma, could maybe make a case, in my opinion, based on national championship numbers. Texas is a blue blood, but they're not on the same level as Notre Dame. And they're not on the same level as Alabama and programs like that. They have 4 claimed national titles, right? And they're just, to me, they're not there right now. I think Oklahoma's got 7. Like Texas has got 4 claimed titles and 5 unclaimed titles. They don't even have not 10 total, where Oklahoma has 17, 7 claimed, 10 unclaimed national titles. And then you look at Alabama claims a national title every year. So somehow, some way they're going to claim a title every year. They have 18 claimed titles, 5 unclaimed national titles. Ohio State has 8 claimed titles, 7 unclaimed titles. Michigan has 12 claimed titles. Now, all but 2 of those came before 1950, but that's a different conversation for a different day. And then obviously Notre Dame, has their 11 claimed national titles, and they have 11 unclaimed national titles as well. So I think those are the 4 blue bloods at the top of the list, and obviously Notre Dame and Ohio State are part of that. So I'm not talking about being considered one of the elite teams in that regard. That's just kind of, I'm talking about right now in this modern era. Notre Dame is not an elite program. They're not. They've been very good, but they've played for the title. This is the 4th time they've played for the title in the last 15 years. They played for the title in 2012. They played for the title in 2018. And when I mean play for the title is you're getting into the 14 playoff. You've got a shot to win the title. If you don't have a shot. They had a shot to win in 2020, but they got blown out in the title game in 2012. They got blown out in the semifinals in 2018. They got blown out in the semifinals in 2020. And so here now it's like, okay, yeah, you're getting to this stage, but until you truly win one, you're not, in my opinion, considered a truly elite program. They're definitely have put themselves on top of the tier 2 right now. And I would even argue that there's a case to be made that if Notre Dame loses a close game, they've kind of proven they're in tier 1. I don't necessarily know that I'm as accepting of that fact, because I think you need at least to have won a title to argue that. Like, you could argue that Clemson still belongs in there because they did win a title 6 years ago and then another one 8 years ago. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trev. But I think a win clearly lets the college football world know that Notre Dame is a true force to be reckoned with in this modern era of college football. Not just because they won the championship, but the why they won the championship, which I'll discuss here in a little bit.
I think a win in the national championship completely busts the door down, right? But I do believe that a win over Georgia kind of cracked it open a little bit. You know what I mean? Because like that was the first postseason win 2 bowl games ago that Notre Dame got that kind of started to put people on notice. You talked about it earlier in the show that, there were some people that doubted Notre Dame's ability to beat IU. The majority of a lot of pundits believe that Georgia was still, look, they had their issues. They were playing with a backup quarterback, but Georgia's still Georgia. Kirby Smart is still Kirby Smart. And Notre Dame hasn't given people a reason to believe that they can win that game, which is fair. Like that is a fair, like in my lifetime, the reason why I was so juiced up about Notre Dame beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl is because I've been alive for 27 and a half years. Right. And now it was to the point where I had not seen it in my lifetime. So I had no leg to stand on to say, well, they should be considered up there because I don't really know. Because they
have the best helmets in college football.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so.
No, you have to use the Brian Kelly. Well, hey, we lost to Alabama by fewer points than Ohio State lost to Alabama. We lost to Clemson by fewer points than Alabama lost to Clemson. I mean, that's literally the only argument you can make, and I hate that argument.
Yeah,
it's like a Notre Dame fan, and especially a Notre Dame head coach should never make that argument to somehow prop his team up. You lost.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's by 1 or by 27, you lost.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it was, for the longest time, it was like, like Notre Dame was that kid that would like brag about how they waited in line to get into the party, but never got into the party. You know what I mean? It's like, I was there on the outside, like, like that's that's
like Rudy running around the stadium trying to get in, like jumping around looking for tickets. Never got in, but he wanted to be there.
Right. He was at the stadium. He just didn't get a seat inside.
Right.
And as silly as it sounds, like that's kind of how it was for Notre Dame over the span of my lifetime. They reached a national championship in 2012. They played in multiple New Year's Six bowls. They played in 2 playoff games, but it was never there, right? And so this opportunity now that Notre Dame has in front of them, they can bust the door wide open. And it's no longer are they there? They're there. The question then turns from are they there to how long can they remain there? You know what I mean? Which is a great position to be in, because you could have everybody's goal is to set up a dynasty like what Nick Saban had at Alabama, which is another reason why this national championship has so many good narratives about it, because you have 2 teams now that are looking to establish their dominance and set up their dynasty within college football, because I'd make the argument that it's up for the taking, right? Last year, Georgia won the national championship in 21 and 22, but they were held out of the playoffs last year, and they were bounced out of the playoffs this year by Notre Dame by 13 points. And Alabama's not where it's at right now as it was with Nick Saban. I still have a lot of faith in Kalen DeBoer. That's a topic for the offseason.
Right.
But, now as far as building a perennial powerhouse, building a dynasty, that is up for debate. And so I think Notre Dame and Ohio State each have the opportunity now to cement themselves and build a really strong foundation to who is going to have that next one, right? Is it finally going to be Ryan Day? I think he's in his 6th year as a head coach, but is it going to be Ryan Day? Okay. Is it going to be Ryan Day in his 6th year? Is it going to be Marcus Freeman in the illustrious, storied 3rd year? Like, you know what I mean? And so all of those things kind of feed into it, but I don't think that there's any doubt about it. A win here for Notre Dame in the national championship, not only does it open the door, because I think it's cracked a little bit, but it blows the door wide open. And now everybody can confidently say, hey, Notre Dame is there. How long can they stay up top? Which is a lot of fun to be talking about, man.
Well, here's a couple other things as well, Trevor. I mean, this is going to be a win would be huge for the school. I mean, we've talked about this before. Money is going to pour in if Notre Dame wins it happens. It's same is true. This is one of those things that's true for both teams. Is money always pours in from donors, and you can go through all the years. They'll talk about how applications are up. I don't know. Do schools still charge for applications now? It used to be a big thing when applications would go up. It'd be huge because you used to have to pay $20 to have an application.
Depends on the school when I was applying.
So if there are schools that still charge application fees, and I don't know who does or doesn't do that anymore, but there's all types of things that go into this where just more people come to the campus, more people go to the bookstore, buy stuff, more people, ticket prices are going to go up. That's an unfortunate side effect, but I think we'll all accept that if it means winning a title. So, when I was in school, you had to pay for application fees, but that was a long time ago. I had some guy, I was on a show today, or earlier today, and he was talking about how, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, and I'm like, bless your heart for thinking that I'm younger than you, but thank you for that. But that's the other thing. But here's another aspect of this, Trevor, that is a big picture aspect to Notre Dame winning. Because again, if they win, they're the national champs, and you get all the perks that go with being the national champs in the present. But we're talking about sort of the big picture aspects of what's at stake for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wins a title, their extension for the TV deal was only 3 years. Or was it 5 years? 5 years. They're going to, if they're kind of building something, and if they win this game, I think it was 3 years. What meant they'd have it in 5, or it was 5 on addition. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, the point is, their TV contract comes up before any of the other conferences' TV contracts comes up. This was the brilliance of the move from Jack Swarbrick and Pete Bavacqua, who both worked on this. Instead of signing a new long-term deal with anyone, while the SEC's negotiating a new deal, while the Big Ten is negotiating a new deal, while the college football playoff is negotiating new deals, Notre Dame said, we're going to take a big pay raise, but we're going to push off the big one for, and I know it's 5 years. I just don't know if it's a 3-year extension on top of 2 left, or if it was a 5-year extension. I think it was 3 on top of what was remaining on the deal, because their TV contract, I think, was meant to expire after this year or after next year. I can't remember which one it is. I'll have to go back and look it up. I should know that. But the point is, it comes up soon, and there will be no conferences in negotiations for a deal. Notre Dame winning a championship. I mean, a big reason why Notre Dame got the NBC deal back in, was it 91, was because of the 88 national title and the fact that Notre Dame became the team during that year. It was Notre Dame, Miami, and Colorado were the 3 best teams of college football during that 3-year stretch leading up to that. With all due respect to Florida State, they were in the top 5, but it was Miami. I mean, from a 3-year stretch, 88, 89, 90, I mean, the only national champs were, Notre Dame, it's been 87 to 89. The national champs were Notre Dame or Miami. And in 1990, it was the tie. That was the year they had the tie between Colorado and Georgia Tech, correct? I believe it was in 1990. So, and the reason Miami didn't win it in 1990s because Notre Dame beat them. Right. I mean, so that played a big role in it. Notre Dame getting a championship is going to give Pete Bavacqua and the Notre Dame leadership, especially if they can keep just be in the playoffs every year for the next 3-4 years. You've got that title. It's going to make them a much more prominent team when it comes to a prominent negotiating position when your new TV contract comes up here in a few years as well. That's another factor that looks at, from a money standpoint too, Trev. And then, of course, the benefits of now, like there's a lot of people that think that you're going to get pushed out of the playoff or pushed into a conference, and when the new playoff comes in a couple of years, when they redo because there's only this year, next year left on the 12-year deal, 12-team playoff, and then they're going to negotiate it again. Well, like, we just won a championship. You're not going to force us out now. You're not going to force us into do something. You know what I mean? And so that's another thing that factors into this too, is Notre Dame now has all the bargaining power when it comes to the conference is trying to force them into a conference when the next bout of playoff expansion comes.
Yeah, another aspect of big picture as well is not only is there going to be an influx of money, you're already starting to see a difference in the talent that Notre Dame's starting to attract in the transfer portal. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They got a nickel corner in Devontae Smith from Alabama. They got Malachi Fields, a premier receiver from Virginia. They just got a defensive tackle from Louisville, right? Like, the list continues to go on and on and on. You know, I mean, Jalen Stroman was an NFL draft prospect, a high NFL
day
draft
2
prospect
guy, yeah,
before he got hurt, right? And so you're already starting to see what kind of talent Notre Dame is attracting because of, like, I see stuff on Twitter all the time about, look at how much coverage like Chris Burgess was getting, not just because he's a fantastic talent, but the team that he's committed to won on a walk-off field goal, and the video was of him watching that happen. So it all ties into the more coverage, the more exposure, and we're talking about a team that already gets some of the best exposure in all of college football is now going to get more exposure for more people to see them across the country. So it's all really exciting stuff. One of the things for me too, I don't know if we were ready to switch over to kind of like the micro view here.
Yeah, let's go.
But for me, it's, the massive opportunity in front of Notre Dame outside of, winning the national championship and all the money that's going to come in is the opponent that you have in front of you, you haven't beaten since 1936. Now, you're going to hear a lot of Ohio State fans throw that number out saying you haven't beat us since before World War II, which is a fact. Mind you, they've played 6 times since then over 89 years. So it's not like Ohio State is, 90-1 against Notre Dame in that time span, right? It's just,
this isn't what was going on with Michigan, where they had won 14 out of 15 games, but they played every single year, except the one year that Michigan was like, no, we want no.
Right. But to me, Notre Dame has an opportunity to right the ship against another opponent that they have yet to conquer in my lifetime, right? I mean, the first Notre Dame Ohio State game I watched was the 05 Fiesta Bowl, and they lost 34-20. And the next game was the 2015 technically 2016, but the 2015 season Fiesta Bowl, and they lost that game 44-28. And then obviously we know what happened in 22 and 23. So Notre Dame has the opportunity to right the ship and not only get back onto the national stage and be the top dog in college football, but they have the opportunity to do it again against a team that they have not beaten in a very, very long time, right? Because the first narrative was against Georgia. You haven't beaten that SEC team. You didn't beat Georgia in 17. You didn't beat them in 19. You haven't won the Sugar Bowl and can't tell you how long. But, now you get the opportunity on the biggest stage that there is in college football to right the ship against a team that has had your number since 1936 in the matchups that you've played, right? So for me, I think that just adds to the micro view of what Notre Dame has in front of them and the opportunity that they have to get a win in the Natty, Brian.
Well, Trev, one of the things that I've said for the last several years, you've heard me say it before you were on the show and you used to listen to the show, and you've heard me say it since you've been on the show, is for Notre Dame, before you can start talking about being the national champions, you've got to become the best team in the North. And Michigan was ahead of them for a small period of time. And then now Michigan's kind of fallen back down to who they are. And you could argue Penn State to a degree was ahead of them, because even though I felt a lot of years Penn State was overrated, they've got a Cotton Bowl victory in recent years. They have a Rose Bowl victory in recent years, and they beat Washington a few years ago, something Notre Dame hadn't done. Yeah, Notre Dame we have more playoff appearances than you. Yeah, and you got killed in both of them. I'm pretty sure Penn State could have got killed if they would have made the playoffs too. You know what I mean? And now you beat Penn State, and you've got a chance to beat Ohio State. I just think it's very interesting. That when you look at this matchup, that what I've said is, if you want to be the best team in the country, you've got to be the best team in your region first, right? And so for Georgia, what did that mean? That meant we got to beat Bama. We want to be the best team in college football. We got to beat Bama. And for Bama, it was what? It was, okay, we got to beat LSU and Florida. Because remember, in the decade before Nick Saban showed up, Florida had won 2 titles. LSU had won 2 titles. So from 04, 05, 06, 07, 08. So in the 5 years before Nick Saban won his first title, 4 of those titles had been won by SEC teams. The only exception being USC in 05. Right? And so when you look at it, Trev, it's like, okay, they had to beat LSU and Florida to win a title. Well, what did they do in each 09? They beat both of them. They beat LSU at regular season. They beat Florida in the SEC title game. Well, then, look, Clemson wants to become a national champion. Well, okay, you got to become the best team in your conference, and you got to beat your in-state rival. They finally did. They started beating Florida State, started beating South Carolina. Okay, well, now you got to beat Bama. And first time they played, they lost. The next 2 times, Clemson won a national championship. right? So that's what you've got to do. Georgia wanted to become the best team in the country. So what do they have to do? You better learn how to beat Alabama first. And it took Kirby Smart a lot of tries to do that, and he finally did that, and it led to them winning 2 national championships. And so, although they didn't play Bama the second year he won the title, correct? They only played Bama the first year. The second year they won a title, they beat LSU in the SEC title game. They didn't play Bama in the regular season, but they did beat them in the championship game in 2021.
Yep.
And so, that's what they had to do. Well, now you're Notre Dame and you're trying to become the best team in the country, and you've got to prove that you're even the best team in the North. And it's just very poetic that I've held that stance. And for Notre Dame to win a title, they will not only have to beat 1, not 2, but 3 teams from the Big Ten to win a championship. Indiana in round 1, 3 top 10 Big Ten teams. And traditional Big Ten teams, not some team they got in the transfer portal, from the Pac-12, but 3 traditional Big Ten teams from the North, the Northeast, Midwest type of region. And I think that's also very poetic. And for Ohio State, it's, okay, well, you've got this team kind of nipping at your heels. They're starting to beat you for some recruits. They're starting to, put up some big wins. They're starting to look like you in a lot of ways. You need to beat them and kind of hold them off and still prove that you're the best team in the North. Beat Penn State, Notre Dame this year, go out and beat Michigan next year. And, and look, if Ohio State wins a title, there may be some Ohio State crazies, and people in Michigan are going to say this. Nobody else cares if they lost to Michigan if they win the national championship. No. Just like no one with a brain is really going to care that Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois if they beat Ohio State. No one's going to care about that. And so for Notre Dame, that's a big part of this, Trevor, like you said, is this is going to be used. And why does that matter? It's bragging rights, but what's the other thing it matters for, Trevor? Recruiting. Not just high school kids, but portal kids as well. To where, here's what y'all have to understand. To get elite players, you need to do one of 2 things. 1, you have to pay them more money than anybody else is willing to pay them in today's era. It's number 1. Or 2, you got to pay them a lot, but they see you as a place they can go win a championship and be developed for the NFL. I'm confident. I'm not 100% certain of this, but from what I've been told, I'm kind of certain of this. People talk about how Ohio State bought a championship. Like, first of all, Notre Dame fans can't say that about anybody because Notre Dame's portal guys did not come to school for free. Some of them might have, but I know for a fact that several of them got money to come here. I'm not saying it's the primary reason they picked them, but that's my point. But what I'm saying is I'm confident, not 100% certain, but confident that Notre Dame did not offer Caleb Downs the highest amount of money of any school that he was looking at. From what I'm told, they were not his top offer. They offered enough combined with all the other things that Ohio State could offer him. NFL development, playing for a championship, things along those lines. And so they were able to get him. If Ohio State was 8-4 last year and had been 8-4 every year for the previous 10 years, the only way they were going to get Caleb Downs is if they offered him way more money than anybody else. Right? That's what this brings to you. High school recruiting. Notre Dame is way more competitive in NIL than people think. And it's not about whether or not you can buy players. It's about whether or not you can get buy-in from the players that you buy. And that's the difference. When guys are going to Ole Miss, they're going to Ole Miss because Ole Miss offered them more money than anybody else. Let's be honest about that. You don't see the same buy-in, which is why they lose 3 football games. And we've seen that from some guys at Alabama, if we're being honest. We saw that with some guys at Tennessee this past year, if we're being honest. The reason that Ohio State and Notre Dame are able to get some of these guys to come in and play the way they've played is because they're like, yeah, I'm getting paid, but I know that there's something bigger here for me than just getting paid. They understand this school offers me a chance to win a championship. This school offers me an opportunity to be developed at an elite level. This school offers me an opportunity to be a high NFL draft pick. That is a big reason why these schools are getting a lot of these top high school kids and why they're getting some other guys. I mean, look, there's some guys that Damon Wilson was a guy that Ohio State thought they were going to get out of high school, and Georgia just offered him more money. So he goes to Georgia. Well, guess what? He's sitting at home right now watching Ohio State play. Notre Dame's got plenty of stories like that where guys took more money to go play for him. I don't want to mention any names of guys that might be playing at Oklahoma or Alabama, but the reality is that that there were guys that did that. Well, now they're sitting at home watching Notre Dame play for a championship. Next time that happens, they may think a little bit harder about it because now Notre Dame could offer that should they win this game. It also allows them to have a little bit more success against Ohio State. Now, they've already started to have more success against Ohio State in certain areas. Kingston Viliama-Asa is a guy that they beat Ohio State for. There's been several guys that they beat them for. But when you talk about some of those positions where they can't beat Ohio State, like I said, it'd be nice to get one or two of those Ohio State receivers over the next few years.
Man.
Well, you go out and win a championship, and now you can say, look, we want to win another one of these, and we need a guy like you because, man, we had a hard time stopping that Jeremiah Smith kid in the championship game. We need a guy like you, to help us get over that hump. Those things all help. And if you can do that, then you're going to have an opportunity, to win some more of those battles. And that's where you get can you sustain, or are you Auburn, where you get there once and then you're not really relevant again for the next 15 years, are you, we've seen teams like that, right? LSU wins in 19 and they really haven't been a legit contender since, and there's plenty of teams like that. Or is this like, okay, we're here to stay? And Notre Dame is in a position where what they're offering financially and opportunities for players to build up their brand as well as get great education and all that allows them to show anyone, look, there's no excuse not to come here now. None. There's no excuse because, hey, can't win a championship Notre Dame. Well, that's off the list. Can't be a high draft pick. That's off the list. You can't pay me as much as other people. Well, that's off the list. And if you can win this game, it gives you that opportunity to do that. So, I mean, there's a lot of big picture things at stake here. And that's true for both teams, but especially for Notre Dame because they're not perceived to be on the same level as Ohio State. If Notre Dame would have won a title last year, would they have had a better shot to get Caleb Downs to come play next to Xavier Watts this year? Who knows? We don't know because they were playing Oregon State in Sun Bowl last year.
Right. Yeah, no, it completely opens the door to getting those higher top recruits. I put out an article today just around the recruiting comparison, and the numbers don't lie, right? From a recruiting perspective. Now, obviously, you have guys playing above what their initial caliber rating was, but Riley Leonard is another kid that Notre Dame kind of outdueled Ohio State for, right? And so you go through and you look at that, and Notre Dame is slowly closing the gap. They haven't closed it yet. They're getting close, but a win in the national championship, back to the big picture, it would severely increase their odds at closing that gap completely. Absolutely.
So, Trevor, obviously, a final piece, and I do think this is probably my personal favorite, is it kills the narrative about Notre Dame. Because now when people there will be people at ESPN that still say what they want to say about Notre Dame. It'll kill the narrative about Notre Dame, and it'll kill the narrative about the type of quote unquote athlete you need to win championships. And this is something that's bothered me for a long time. You know this. When I was talking about, had a chance to speak with a couple people about this down at our get together the day of the game. There's always been this narrative. Well, Notre Dame can't recruit the top athletes. Okay, explain what you mean by that. Well, look, Southern athletes, kids from the South. That blah, 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 blah. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. Well, who are you talking about here? Highly ranked recruits. Well, Notre Dame gets lots of big time, highly ranked offensive linemen. Notre Dame gets lots of high. Well, no, but like the athletes, who are you talking about? You know who they're talking about. And it's always been a lie. It's always been a prejudice and an assumption that people think, well, because you look like this and because you're from a public school in this part of the country, you're probably like a 2-3 who's really not that smart, doesn't care about education, and you're just going somewhere to play football, and I ain't go to school for school kind of guy. That's always been false. I mean, Myron Rolle didn't go to Florida State because they gave him the easiest path to become a brain surgeon, which he is, by the way. He picked Florida State because that's where he wanted to go to be developed in football, and he did what he needed to do to still become a brain surgeon, right? There are kids like that, but there's kids from the North like that. There has always been a lot of players that were from the South, that looked a certain way, that were athletic, that cared about education. But the difference is their chosen profession was they wanted to be a professional football player. And other schools offered them a better opportunity for that. I know plenty of guys that went to Florida and played for Urban Meyer, who also worked 3 5s and got 2 degrees and did some good things, right? I mean, it kills that narrative. Not so Notre Dame can recruit those guys in the future, but to say they already have. They already have recruited those guys. You know, like you can look like Jeremiah Love and be a phenomenal student who cares about education. And I've been told for 20 years you can't, and I hate it, and I get sick of it. You can't be fast and actually care about education. Yeah, you can. And to me, that's a big thing. That whole, well, you can't recruit to Notre Dame because of academics. What does that mean? Well, what does that mean? Top athletes are stupid and don't care about – it's always been a BS narrative. Reggie Bush could have easily got into Notre Dame. But if you were coming out of high school in the mid-2000s, are you going to want to play for USC or Notre Dame? Forget all the other stuff. Who gives you the best chance to do all the things you want to do and what you want to do professionally? That's like saying you have an opportunity to go to Notre Dame business school or go to some, school in your state that has a very low-ranked business school, and you're going to pick this one for in. Why would you pick the other one? If you could afford, but you got a full ride to both, where are you going to go? You're going to go to Notre Dame. Why? Because they give you the best opportunity to maximize your abilities, your education, to then go get the best opportunities you have in your chosen field. And that's a narrative that has really pissed me off for a long time. And I'll just say, at the very best, it's prejudiced. And we know what it is at the very worst. And I think this destroys that narrative if Notre Dame can win. I actually think, because even now we're still hearing it. Well, Notre Dame's not the most talented team, but they're real smart. We're already hearing all the buzzwords. They're a really smart football team. They play hard. They're coached really well. We're hearing all the buzzwords. They're not the most talented, but insert, statement about how they're just really smart. I don't know about you, but Jeremiah Love is going to be one of the best athletes on the field on Saturday. I don't know what I'd be willing to bet you that if they raced, Leonard Moore could beat any of Ohio State's cornerbacks in a race. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean Ohio State's not fast. They are. They have great athletes. But this is an athletic football team, and I think it kills that narrative that Notre Dame wins just because their kids are smart. They may not be the fastest, but they're just really smart. And it says, no, they are very talented, and they are smart, and they care about their education. And you can do both. And a lot of kids choose to do both. And even kids who don't go to Notre Dame still choose to get a great education. It's just they felt that there were better opportunities for them from a football standpoint in that regard. And I'm looking forward to that dying. And people will still say it, but now you can look at them and laugh even harder. That's what I think a game like this, because like you've already heard it, Trev. You've heard all the buzzwords about this Notre Dame team and how they stack up athletically to Ohio State, which then assumes that every kid that's a great athlete at Ohio State doesn't care about going to class. And not every kid at Ohio State's a great athlete. It's Cardell Jones.
Right. I mean, look, man, the thing that's frustrating the most for me is you take a Jeremiah Love, you take Leonard Moore, you take Christian Gray, you take Jadarian Price, you take Jaden Greathouse, and you put them on any other team that's not Notre Dame, and they're praised for their athleticism.
Correct.
You put them in a blue and gold uniform, and I heard it after Notre Dame beat Penn State. It's like, on paper, they shouldn't have won, but this team just continues to find ways to win. And it's like,
well, based on what?
I know. And that's what's so frustrating is like they're trying to paint this narrative that really any angle that they can come from, that Notre Dame isn't a good, talented, athletic, fast, long football team, they will. And now the new one is they've kind of gotten backed into this corner. I'm talking national pundits here. They've gotten backed into this corner of, well, Notre Dame's playing for a national championship. They beat IU, Georgia, and Penn State to get there. They're about to face Ohio State. So we can't say that they're just not good. So now let's start tuning into it's just this Cinderella story narrative, that it's just a bunch of gritty, hard-nosed, intelligent football players. It's like, hey, listen, like Notre Dame's team isn't full of great NFL player, but it's not full of a bunch of Danny Amendolas that are just right. They make the smart heads-up play. Sure. And like, look, there's a lot of talent here. But like I said, you go put any one of those players that I mentioned, you go put Bryce Young, you go put Charles Jagasaw, you go put any of those guys, you go put a Don Shuler,
Jalen Sneed, Drake Bowen,
right,
Aiden Ausberry. Exactly.
You go put any one of those guys, in scarlet and gray. You put any one of them in the Alabama crimson. You put any one of them in the Georgia red and black. And they're the best athletes. This is why Georgia recruits the best athletes. So I'm with you, man. The narrative needs to die, and it needs to die quickly.
It's like my guy I Am 10 says, but Trevor, they are tough and gritty and smart. And they are. It's not to say that they aren't. It's to say that they are that and they are this. Because look, Ohio State's got plenty of tough, gritty guys as well. They don't talk about that, though. Caleb Downs is one of the most physical safeties you're going to see. But, oh, what a great athlete. Yeah, he's also really smart, and he's also really tough. That's the point. And that's what drives me nuts about it, to be honest with you. It's I'm looking forward to that narrative dying a very hard death. And so those are some of the benefits as well that go into what's at stake for Notre Dame. But, and then the final one is for Marcus Freeman. You get to prove that, hey, you're capable of doing this at Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame is one of those schools, Trevor, where I kind of feel like there's some schools where, like, as long as you're not an idiot, you should be able to win there to some degree. Like, unless you're just a bad coach, you should be able to win 9 games a year at Texas. I mean, unless you're just a bad coach, you should be able to win 8-9 games a year at Bama. Minimum. There are some schools, and then if you're a good coach, you can win a championship, and you don't have to be a great coach to win at LSU. Matter of fact, in LSU's last 3 titles, only one of those guys was even considered a really good coach or better. I mean, nobody thinks Ed Orgeron's a great coach. Nobody thinks Les Miles is a great coach, but it's LSU. You can recruit that kind of talent and all those type of things. There are some schools, though, where you need the right coach to win. Michigan's one of those. Notre Dame's one of those. But if you are the right kind of coach, you can flat out win there at an elite level. And I think that's what Marcus Freeman has a chance to. He's actually already kind of shown that. And if they play a competitive 4-quarter game, that will be an even stronger argument. Because trust me, there's a lot of national people just praying that Ohio State blows Notre Dame out. So then they can say, see, Penn State wasn't that good. Georgia wasn't that good. Notre Dame's not that good. I mean, you can listen to the guy in the top hat on ESPN whose name I don't even want to say right now. I'm so disgusted by it. And he'll say some dumb stuff like that. And, that dies a very hard death if Notre Dame wins this football game. That's the other part of it, too. You had to beat the best team in the SEC. You had to beat the best team in the Big Ten in order to get to this championship, if you're able to win one. And so I think those are all things that factor into what's at stake for Notre Dame. And for Notre Dame fans, it's like things that, if they win this game, things that piss Notre Dame fans off for a long time will now just make you smile. When they start to say the thing, oh, you can't do – I mean, New Year's Six Bowl thing is dead. Championship drought is gone. I mean, there's literally nothing they can throw at you except, oh, well, you're independent. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know, and we love that. Oh, your kids have to go to class. Yeah, and can still win championships. You know what I mean? Like there's anything they throw at you now, you just laugh at. And I think that's a big thing. But we're going to get more into the actual breakdown of the game next, Trevor. We'll actually dive more into this matchup. But I did think as we always do, we wanted to kind of start off with this conversation. And I'm going to move that last bit to the end of this breakdown, Trev. So we'll do that. I think it's going to fit better there. So that's part 2 of today's show, folks. Just kind of looking at what's at stake here for Notre Dame in this football game. Part 2 is going to be, we're going to take a dive into the Ohio State Buckeyes. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trevor, part 3 of today's show is we're going to dive into a look at the Ohio State Buckeyes. We always do this in the first show that we do. We talk about what's at stake for Notre Dame, and then we take a dive into the opponent. Now, we did that for the last 3 opponents. We did that in our regular season, and we're going to obviously do that again for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And we're going to take a look at who this team is, and it's sort of a get-to-know-your-opponent type of standpoint. I don't think we're going to have to be, as people I don't think are going to be as upset, Trevor, I don't think about when we praise this team, because I think most Notre Dame fans know that this team is actually really good and they're going to be ready for it. So I'm ready to dive into it. man, I think this is going to be fun, and we're going to kind of kick things off with a look at the Buckeyes and how they got here. You know, Trev, I'm just going to kind of quickly introduce them, and I'll let you go through the schedule because you did an article like this, a how they got here article at the front page at irishbreakdown.com, so we can kind of go through their season. But, you know, when we talk about preseason, Trevor, this is one of the teams that people expected to be here. There's no surprise. There's no, oh, wow, Ohio State's playing for the national championship. I didn't see that coming. I mean, they were number 2 in the country this year in both preseason polls. It should be pointed out that the team that was ranked number 1, Notre Dame, beat. The team that was ranked number 3 and 4, Ohio State, beat to get here. Notre Dame was 7. So everybody expected Notre Dame to be in the playoff and to win a game. But beyond that, not sure. This is a team that everybody thought was, which means from the moment the season kicked off against Akron, the expectation has been beat Michigan, get to the national championship game. That was the expectation. They didn't do the first one, but the second one is going to be pretty sweet for the Buckeyes if they can win that one. But so they kind of came into the season with a different type of pressure on them than most teams not named Georgia or Texas, in that anything short of this stage would have been considered a failure, to the point, Trev, and again, I think this is irrational. I have heard people say this, like people doing shows, not fans on Twitter. I've heard people on shows saying this in the preseason. If Ohio State doesn't get to the title game, Ryan Day should be fired. Think about that. That's the kind of pressure that was on this football team coming into the season. And much like Notre Dame's, there were some ups and downs, but here we are. They're playing for a national championship. But I do think it was important to set the stage of this is a team that people thought would and should be here coming into the season as the preseason number 2 team behind only Georgia.
Yeah. I mean, my prediction for, and my sources decided, and unfortunately I was not working at Irish Breakdown at the time, but my prediction for the national championship in July, I was at a bachelor party, and I said it was going to be Notre Dame and Ohio State. So here we go. Maybe I'm Nostradamus. That's what Vince called me in the show that him and I did together and upon further review. But, you know, you go through and you look at Ohio State, right? And you look at how that team was put together. You factor in Jim Knowles going into his 3rd year. They bring in Chip Kelly, the additions that they made in the offseason, and it just made sense, right? So what did their journey look like to get here? What did it look like for them to reach a national championship? And they started out hot. Right, as you guys can see it, they ripped off a bunch of not close wins, right? And their first 5 games won were by at least 28 points, which Ohio State began the year the way that everybody expected them to, right? They were 5-0 on their entire schedule. They were 2-0 in the Big Ten leading into their game at number 3 Oregon, and that game lived up to the hype. It was a 1-point loss for Ohio State. It came down to the wire. And Ohio State had the opportunity to win at the end of the game, and they weren't able to close that gap. And they ended up losing by 1 point on the road. And then their next 2 games were interesting. To Brian's point, what he said earlier in the show, that they did a better job overcoming their second loss than they did their first. Ohio State struggled a little bit against Nebraska and Penn State. They did.
Lost in Nebraska. I think Nebraska choked that game away a little bit in the second half.
They did. And so Nebraska outscored Ohio State in the second half 11-8. They just weren't able to finish, you know, but the mark of any good team, and I'll say this, and you've said this, and the mark of any good team is being able to win multiple different styles of game.
Yep.
You have to be able to show that you can win ugly. And that's what Ohio State did against Nebraska. You know, their offense wasn't really clicking. Their defense was getting done what they needed to, right? Like it was similar to, now, mind you, it wasn't a loss for Ohio State, but it was similar to the Northern Illinois game. Like the defense held Northern Illinois to 16 points.
Right.
The offense just needed to step up.
Right.
And Nebraska.
A&M maybe is an even better example. I don't think Nebraska is as good as A&M, but similar game where, you know, your defense kept you in that game the whole game. You just needed your offense to make a couple plays in the 4th quarter, and Ohio State's guys did, and Notre Dame guys did as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, Ohio State struggled to generate any sort of run game against Nebraska, and which is one of the reasons why they had a narrow 4-point win. They go and they play Penn State. You didn't start off hot. Will Howard throws a pick 6 on his first offensive possession of the game. But that's when Ohio State's
fell
defense
behind 10-0. Sound
Yeah.
familiar? To Penn State. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm. And their defense took over, right? Penn State was held out of the end zone for the remainder of that game. They were only able to manage 2 field goals the rest of that game.
Mm-hmm.
Once that hit, and once Ohio State beat Penn State, that was kind of in Happy Valley, right? That was kind of their moment of, all right, we're back. And it started to reflect on the scoreboard. They beat Northwestern 31-7. They beat IU 38-15. They destroyed Purdue 45-0, which I'm not going to discredit it. It's kind of what a lot of teams did to Purdue, right? You know, I saw
including Notre Dame.
Yep, including Notre Dame. Including Notre Dame. I saw a stat the other day on Twitter. Unfortunate for Purdue, but if they started every single game with a 34-0 head start, they'd be 6-6.
Good God.
Yeah,
so bad.
I know.
That is so bad.
It was one of the craziest.
Think about this. If they would have got spotted 50 against Notre Dame, they still would have lost. I mean,
by double digits.
Yes.
It was one of the crazier sports stats that I had ever seen. But you know, that win over IU it was their third top 5 game of the season. They won by 23 points, and all signs were pointing into the direction of Ohio State being able to play for the Big Ten championship. They were getting back on track. They were supposed to beat Michigan. And similar to what Notre Dame experienced on September 7th, tragedy struck in Columbus, and they lost to Michigan for a 4th year in a row. And all of the narratives that came out of that game were crazy. Like we talked about, they fought more about the flag planting than they did the first 60 minutes of the football game. And there were questions around, is Ryan Day the guy? Do they fire him in the locker room? Do they wait till after the first round of the playoffs? Is Will Howard the guy? And the loss to Michigan for Ohio State changed the mentality of that football team, similar to what the loss to Northern Illinois did to Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And it put them in a position where it's like, we need to just play to our standard. Faceless opponent. It doesn't matter who lines up across from us, because if we play to our standard, we win those games. And their playoff run was reflective of that. You know, they destroyed Tennessee at home in a game that was never really competitive.
And I would even argue, Trev, 42-17 doesn't do justice to how uncompetitive the game was.
No, I mean, to the point where when I was writing the article, I forgot Tennessee scored 17 points. Legitimately.
Ohio State only scored 42 in that game. That was kind of my response. I thought I remember scoring a lot more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And then against Oregon, they go up 34-0 in the first quarter, right? It was some of it was, you know, they wanted revenge for their first loss of the season, but Ohio State was just playing to their standard of football, right? They were getting the ball to the perimeter, getting the ball into the hands of their playmakers. It's no mystery to me that Jeremiah Smith went off against Tennessee and Oregon.
Dominated Oregon in the trenches.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And which led them to the Cotton Bowl against Texas. And this was the question.
I will say this real quick, too. I don't want to hear excuses about, well, Evan Stewart didn't play in that game. If Evan Stewart would have played, I think the game would have been closer, but it still would have been a convincing Ohio State win because they dominated him in the trenches in a way they did not in the first game.
Yes.
100%. That was the biggest difference.
Yes. On offense and defense. Will Howard through Tennessee and Oregon was sacked 0 times. Yeah. 0 times in 2 playoff games. And so that's massive. Right. And so all the momentum was building up for Ohio State and Texas in the Cotton Bowl. And we had all talked about this game at Irish Breakdown in a similar light that, you know, Ohio State got their kind of needle moving win against Oregon. Notre Dame got theirs against Georgia. Texas and Penn State were now looking for their needle moving wins in the semifinals of the college football playoff.
Right.
And there were more questions, like what was Ohio State going to look like against a better defense? Because I don't think that there's any question that Texas had a better defense than what Oregon had. There are some similarities between them and Tennessee. I think Tennessee had a good defense. But
Tennessee didn't want to be there.
I agree.
I mean, they didn't want to be there. They were every little bump, guys are tapping out, going down like flies. They didn't want to be there. There was a report before the season, before the playoff, that there was an SEC team where coaches were having to pay players to stay just so they could practice. They didn't say who it was. The way that they played, it would not shock me at all that if it was Tennessee.
No.
They played like a bunch of kids who knew they weren't going to win a championship and didn't want to be there anymore. No. That's how they played in that game.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Ohio State played like a team that had something to prove.
Yes.
And boy, did they.
Yes.
To your point, that was not the Tennessee defense we saw in the regular season.
No.
Texas played like the defense that has the number 3 scoring defense in college football against Ohio State, which meant Ohio State had to earn everything they got in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first real test that their offense had gotten in this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the next closest test their offense got was November 2nd against Penn State, right? Like, I mean, because Notre Dame fans know how good that Penn State defense was, and so Ohio State had once again something to prove that despite their lopsided wins in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, similar to Notre Dame, lopsided wins, there's always going to be those talking heads that, well, they haven't really played that good of a defense. Let's see what they do against, Makuba and a bigger, Texas defensive line than what Oregon had, right? And it was the football game that everybody would want to see in a semifinal playoff game. It was 14-14 going into the fourth quarter. Ohio State scores. Quinshon Judkins runs in a 1-yard touchdown to take the lead 21-14. Texas has the opportunity to go down the field, tie the game, potentially win it. And Ohio State's defense shut the door on them. Yes, I know there's going to be a lot of talking points around, well, how do you run a toss on the 1-yard line, which was a horrible play call. But still, Ohio State's defense stiffened and did what they needed to in the moment that they needed, like similar to how I see Christian Gray intercepting Drew Aller to put his team back in position to ultimately ice the game. That's what Ohio State's defense did. Jack Sawyer, the guy that was, all Ohio State fans know it, and I'm sure that Archer and Mr. Bucknuts in the chat can attest to this, but Jack Sawyer's their culture guy. Like that doesn't mean that he's not a good football player. He's fantastic, but their guy, like the Ohio State guy that elected to forego the NFL draft and come back for his final year of eligibility in Columbus. It's a little poetic that he's the one that strips at Quinn Ewers, his former roommate, and ran it back 83 yards for a touchdown. So to put the game away and end it. So yeah, that's Ohio State season in a review, and it's not, this wasn't it's not the same conversation that we had with Georgia, right? Where it's like they've been up at times, they've been down at times, because the difference is with Ohio State, when they've been down, they've still won outside of that game on November 30th. But I'm a big believer that sometimes you need to reach your lowest point to really understand what you have to do as a team and as a unit. And Ohio State found that out on November 30th. That's where I'm at with it.
I think I've said this. I don't know that Notre Dame is the team they are today if they don't lose to Northern Illinois. I've said this here. I've said this on other shows, like national shows. I felt like Notre Dame always had the talent to be here, but I don't think they had the mindset to be here. And I think that game that early, that embarrassing, was the wake-up call they needed to say, guys, we're not going about our business the right way. We're not going about our business like a championship team. We started thinking we were hot stuff. You heard Howard Cross talk about it in the Here Come the Irish documentary on Peacock, or series on Peacock. He said, we know who Northern Illinois was. We didn't take that team seriously. That is such a bad admission. That is such a you're a 6-year senior. How I don't care. I'm glad you admitted it. How did you have that mindset as a 6-year senior? Of everything you've been through in your career at Notre Dame, and the losses you've been through when your team didn't show up, and the almost losses to teams like Toledo and Ball, goodness gracious, how did you have that mindset? But they did. And part of it is because this team was very confident in themselves coming into the season. And we saw that against A&M. And I think that kind of woke them up. And I think when you look at like their loss to Oregon, I think that was a loss where they're like, look, we should have won that game. We should have done this. We got this call, that call, whatever. We should have won that game. And I don't think they handled it real well, which is why they didn't play very well the next 2 games, if I'm being honest. I think the Michigan game was the same kind of wake-up call for Ohio State that the Notre Dame game was for Northern Illinois. They just thought at home against Michigan, who stinks, we're going to go out there and we're just going to roll them. They have no chance against us. They're not nearly as athletic as us. They aren't. They're not nearly as talented as us. They weren't. Jim Harbaugh's not there anymore. He isn't. We're Ohio State. They are. And we're going to smack them. And we're going to prove that we're better than them by playing a certain style that is not who we are, and then not being able to adjust. That's what the mentality they had. And I said this before the Tennessee game. If Ohio State doesn't handle that loss well, they're 1 and done, 2 and done at the best. If they respond to this well, they could go on a roll. And that's exactly what happened. That was their wake-up call, like Notre Dame's was from Northern Illinois, which is, again, is why I say these teams got here based on very similar moments. And I think that they both needed those wins. I mean, like Ohio State played well against – I mean, they beat Penn State and they beat Indiana and Northwestern and Purdue, but their offense was not playing very well. I mean, the 38 points against Indiana, they had a 7-yard touchdown drive, 2 40-yard touchdown drives, and a punt return for a touchdown. Their offense did not play well at all against Indiana. They didn't play great against Northwestern. They scored almost 20 points less against Purdue than Notre Dame did. And just Penn State game, the offense did what they needed to do at the end, but they weren't playing very well. They had some big mistakes in that game. The Michigan game kind of woke that whole team up. And the defense kind of just kept doing what they've been doing all year. Like, the defense has been legit good all year. And it was the offense that needed the wake-up call. To your point earlier, Trev, the defense is not why you lost to Michigan. I mean, they did everything but score in that game. And it was the offense. And they needed that wake-up call, just like the Notre Dame offense needed a wake-up call early in the year as well. The defense is not why Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. I mean, they played their role, giving up the long touchdown drive and all that. But, like, again, against the MAC team, you hold them to 16 points at home. You should freaking win that game if you're Notre Dame. If you're playing Michigan at home and you hold them to 13 points, you should freaking win that game by double digits, right? And that's where I say that both of these teams kind of got here with sort of similarly embarrassing losses. Now, the stature of Michigan and Northern Illinois is not the same. That's not what I'm trying to compare. I'm talking about they were humbled in a way that I think made them better football teams coming out. And that's exactly what we've seen from both of these teams, which is why they're here. Is they were always the best teams. They just didn't always necessarily always play like it. And I think those two games lit a fire under both teams, and that's why Notre Dame has dominated basically everybody since then, except Purdue and sort of USC. I mean, people do forget going into the fourth quarter, Notre Dame had a 2-touchdown lead on USC going in the fourth quarter. Penn State was obviously a great game, tough battle for both teams against Penn State. I've earned a lot of respect for Penn State this year, not their fans, but their football team. So that's why I keep saying, Trev, these teams have followed very similar paths to the championship in that regard.
I mean, it's tough, right? Like, I 100% agree that it's Michigan and Northern Illinois are not on the same stature of what their programs are.
I don't think they're very dissimilar as teams in 2024.
Sure.
But as far as, like, dude, look, let's be honest. Losing to a bad Michigan team is better than losing to a good Northern Illinois team.
No, 100%. And then once you factor in, like, it's the game, it's the rivalry, like, I get all of that. But the situations were very similar. You're at home. You're playing against an opponent that everybody and their mom thought that you were just going to absolutely decimate. Both teams were favored by 20. And I think it goes back to what we talked about in the start of the show, Brian. I'm really, really happy that these are the two teams that are playing in the national championship, because it goes to show, like, this is what makes college football so great. Like, it's that you can lose that kind of game and still battle back and make it back to a game where you can prove your greatness. That's why I love college football, man. Everybody's going to hang the losses over both teams. Like, to your point, there's still going to be some Michigan fans that try to hang on to, we beat the national champs, or we beat the team that's playing in the national championship. And it's like, I mean, yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, we saw it after Notre Dame beat Penn State to make it to the Natty. It was, the Northern Illinois should get a partial championship ring if Notre Dame wins and all this other stuff. And it's like, look, redemption arcs are awesome. Right. That's what I love. And Ohio State and Notre Dame have now, I'm not going to say completed, because each still have one more game to play, but they made it. Like, they made it to the stage that everybody said that they couldn't make it to. And that's why I love college football, man. Like, that's what makes it so great.
When you talk about what's at stake for Ohio State, though, I do think that is something that is important, though. If they lose to Notre Dame, all of a sudden the whole, well, we still beat you thing stings a little bit more. Because you don't have that Well, yeah, but we got to the title game, and the Michigan fans, and you lost to Notre Dame. As someone who grew up in Ohio, there's 2 losses that would potentially hurt Ohio State fans more, and it's Michigan is obviously the number one, and then losing Notre Dame would be the other. Now, I haven't experienced that, but I'm just telling you from how they view Notre Dame as an inferior team and an inferior fan base and those type of things. That's what I've experienced my whole life.
Yeah.
But if you win the championship, then you don't give a crap what Michigan fans say. Like, say whatever you want. You beat on our very worst game of the year. You still only beat us by 3. We play like absolute trash, and you still only won by 3 points. And we, we went on to show that who we were by winning a championship, right? Like I'm not going to cry. Like Notre Dame beats Ohio State. I don't care about Notre. Matter of fact, I'm almost grateful if Notre Dame beats Ohio State. I'm almost grateful for Northern Illinois beating them, right? If they lose Ohio State, then, maybe that conversation has a little bit more, something you need to take from it. So I do think when you talk about what's at stake for those 2 teams, I do think for Ohio State, that's why winning is important for them.
Yeah.
Beyond just the normal reasons for winning, right? It's because then, and this is more for fans than it is for the team, obviously, but it is still to a degree for the team. You beat that, you don't give a rip what Michigan did anymore. Like I've heard people say, like, if you could beat Michigan and lose the title game, would you rather do that? And Ohio State fans would rather do that. I'm like, I don't think today's Ohio State fans are that way. I think 20, 30 years ago, that was probably true. Where beating Michigan and then losing in the Rose Bowl and not winning a national championship was better for an Ohio State fan than winning the Rose Bowl and maybe a championship but losing to Michigan. This is a different era. The Michigan rivalry is still huge. But because of the way the championships are decided now, I think if you go out there and win it on the field, you don't really give a rip anymore what happened in November. And the same would have been true last year. Let's say Ohio State would have beat Michigan last year. Michigan still makes the playoffs and wins the championship. They're not going to feel at all a certain bad way about losing Ohio State. They're going to still be like, well, we won a championship, so you can go ahead and brag about beating us as we lift up this national championship trophy. You know what I mean? And so,
yeah,
that's how I look at it.
Yeah, man, national championship trumps all. It does. Like no matter what. I'm kind of in the same boat as you are.
But in the generation before yours, so like when I was a kid, it was not that way.
Wow,
it was not that way. Beating Michigan was there was no but. If you lose to Michigan, and it was like end of sentence. I don't care what the but is. You have to beat Michigan. Like I'm serious. It was wild. It was. Championships were determined by voters, and there was always it was rarely like 1 versus 2 in the championship game. It was like it was so that's why I say it's different now, but back then, dude, I'm telling you that's how it was. Like when I was a kid, which is obviously before you were born, but as you were saying, now it matters. The Michigan game is huge for that, for both fan bases.
Yeah.
But championship trumps those other things now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's for Notre Dame, if they win the national championship, I am okay with Marcus Freeman paying a visit to Thomas Hammock and shaking his hand and being like, yo, thank you, I guess, for September 7th. I won't be one of those because that was a really rough day for me. But, I understand that sentiment. If Ohio State loses to Notre Dame, not only that, we were talking about Midwest powerhouses and all that stuff. So now Ohio State would be in a spot where not only can you not beat Michigan right now, I'm not saying that's going to be the case forever. I'm not saying Michigan is going to do to Ohio State what Ohio State did to Michigan for 14 years. Not staking that claim at all. But you're in a spot where the senior class at Ohio State has never beaten Michigan, and now you lost to Notre Dame in the national championship. So then what do you have to hang your hat on now? We beat Penn State every year? Like that's what it would have to be. And that's not a knock to Penn State. Just what history tells us is Penn State loses that.
At least you're the third best team in the North, not the fourth best team in the North.
Right. So that is an interesting look on it for sure. Definitely an interesting look on it.
So yeah, that's their trip to here, Trevor. Dominant when Ohio State is on, they're as dominant as any team in the country.
Yes.
Like there's no doubt about that. And I think these margins of victory show that. When they're not on, like every other team, including Notre Dame, things can get hairy. Let's look at some statistical analysis here, Trevor, of the Buckeyes, looking at the offense first. Forgot to put their ranking for yards per completion, but it is top 5. They rank 12th in college football in scoring offense. I was on a show today, and I wanted to point that out because this has been a frustrating talking point for me, is about how good Ohio State is on offense and how Notre Dame is not good on offense. And I'm like, you guys do know that Notre Dame scored more points this year than Ohio State. You do know that in the 3 common opponents that they played this year, that Notre Dame averaged more yards per game, more yards per play, and more points per game. You guys are aware of that, right? That's a frustrating talking point for me, but that's more of a talking point about the narrative, not about the Ohio State offense. The Ohio State offense is a very good, very dangerous offensive football team that, much like Notre Dame, was learning a new system. And one difference between Notre Dame and Ohio State this year is Ohio State didn't really get challenged offensively until really, honestly, probably kind of Oregon, but not really until Nebraska. Nebraska was probably the first really good defense they played. You could maybe throw Iowa in there. I just think Iowa does not match up well with Notre Dame because of how they play. I mean, Ohio State because how they play. But even in that Iowa game, they had 7 points at halftime, I believe. Or it was 7-0 at halftime, I think is what the score was. And so whereas Notre Dame their offense got shown early, hey, you got a lot of work to do. And that's why I think Ohio State hit that law in the middle of the season that Notre Dame had to go through early in the season against Texas A&M and Northern Illinois. Because, look, I'm not trying to justify Notre Dame losing Northern Illinois. It's an inexcusable loss. There's no justification for it. There's no buts involved. This is more of an evaluation of Northern Illinois. This is still a team that ranked Notre Dame in the first 4 games of the year, Trevor, outside of Purdue. If you look at scoring defense, Texas A&M is the worst scoring defense Notre Dame played in the first 4 games outside of the Purdue game. And because they ranked this year, they ranked 20, let's see, they were actually 34th in scoring defense. Northern Illinois was 14th. Miami, Ohio was 15th. Like, Notre Dame had to play some pretty good defenses early. Northern Illinois finished 4th in college football in total defense this season. And so, like, they had to face those tough teams where Ohio State kind of went through a stretch in the middle against that because Nebraska's got a pretty good defense when they show up. Penn State's obviously got a really good defense. Oregon has a talented defense, not necessarily a great defense. And I think what happened in that is that's their wake-up call that they needed to work through to work out some kinks. And now that they're playing well, their offense looks a lot more dynamic than maybe what those numbers might show. Still ranked 30th in the country in yards per game, but 3rd in yards per play, which, as I've said, Trevor, I care a lot more about yards per play than yards per game. Yards per game has a lot more to do with opportunity. It has a lot more to do with field position. If you're blowing teams out, you're probably not racking up 300 yards in the second half. You're probably in kind of, backups during the game, things along those lines. I care a lot more about yards per play, and I've been consistent with that all season. So that, to me, is more indicative of the danger that Ohio State presents than any other statistic. Like rushing yards is another example. They rank 66th in the country in rushing yards, but they do rank 29th in yards per carry. That, to me, is more indicative of if they committed to when they commit to running the ball, they can be a good football, a dangerous rushing team. Passing offense, they rank 25th in the country in total in passing yards, but they're 4th in yards per attempt. They are 3rd in rating, and they're 4th in completion percentage. Will Howard completes balls at a very high level, as you can see there. Sacks allowed, they're 10th in the country in sacks per game. They're 57th in third down offense and 38th in the red zone, which I think are 2 interesting numbers. And they do rank 32nd in turnovers, which is another interesting stat to consider. So, it's like a lot like Notre Dame's offense, Trevor. There's some things in there that are really, if you're an opponent, are kind of scary, but also some things in there that make you say this is not a vintage Ohio State offense. It's not a CJ Stroud-led 45-point a game. How are you going to stop this team? Like, this isn't the offense that could go out and score 41 on Georgia 2 years ago in the playoff. It's not that, in my opinion. It's very good, but it's not that.
I think there's a big misconception. Again, it's going back to that narrative-based thing that you talked about. I think people, national media, fans, They just assume an offense is better when they throw the ball down the field. I literally think that's the narrative taken away. And Ohio State has some exciting players on the perimeter. Jeremiah Smith is a dude. Emeka Egbuka is a dude. Carnell Tate stepped up in a big way this year. You know what I mean? So it's just, I think that's where the narrative comes from, because Notre Dame doesn't do it and it looks like super sexy. Like it's not super cool, I guess, anymore to run the football, even though the best teams in the country, when they're at their best, including Ohio State, runs the football.
Right. This is a better team than Ohio State was 2 years ago.
Yes.
That's the difference. It's a better team.
Yes.
It's not this explosive 40-plus point per game offense. It's a better team because when the offense is needed to step up and score points, if the defense has an off day, for the most part, they've done that outside of the Oregon game, the first Oregon game. And but they have a great defense. They don't hurt themselves on special teams, and at times have made plays on special teams, and their offense is very good. It's just not special like it's been in the past. And I think both of these teams, but it goes back to what you said earlier, Trevor. It's why is Ohio State perceived to be better than Notre Dame on offense? Well, in some ways, I think they are a better offense than Notre Dame. I mean, they rank higher in yards per play, which is a very important metric for me. You know that. They're a slightly better third down offense. But in other ways, Notre Dame is better than Ohio State on offense. They score more points, which if you removed defensive and special teams touchdowns, they're about the same. They're very similar. But why is Notre Dame perceived to be this grinded out team where Ohio State's this sexy offensive team? It's because, number one, they put up a lot of points in the playoff, the first two playoff games. But number two, it's because they have the elite athletes. I shouldn't even do air quotes there. They do have elite athletes. Notre Dame doesn't have a Jeremiah Smith in their idea because a sexy receiver is always considered better than a sexy running back. That's just how it is from a media standpoint. Both of these offenses do what it takes to win, with one big exception. Michigan game for Ohio State and the Northern Illinois game for Notre Dame. That's the exception. But both of those teams have waved bye-bye to that team, to those offensive football teams, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But again, it goes back to me, like Ohio State is at its best when it's when they are a balanced offense, right? There's this, similar to the Ohio or to the Indiana matchup that Notre Dame had. Like there was this perceived notion that IU will throw the ball all over the yard and Curtis Rourke just goes for 450 yards a game. Like there's a reason why Ohio State is in the top 25, but at 25th in passing yards per game. They're very efficient at what they do, right? They're in the top 5 in both yards per attempt and yards per completion, but they aren't this CJ Stroud-esque type of offense where he's averaging 319 passing yards a game. Right now in the playoffs, in the first 2 games in the playoffs, Will Howard had 305 average against Tennessee and against Oregon. But to me, the biggest differentiator is they ran the ball effectively, right? Against Tennessee, Travion Henderson averaged 8 yards a carry, had 2 rushing touchdowns. They are at their best when they run the football. Against Oregon, the second time that they played each other, they rushed for 181 yards as a team, 5.8 yards per carry.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference maker to me. Like you look at, Jeremiah Smith was locked down against Texas, 1 catch for 3 yards, but you had the other players. So you had Carnell Tate go for over 80. You had Emeka Egbuka have 5 or 6 receptions on the night. But the difference was Quinshon Judkins was an efficient runner. Travion Henderson was a difference maker in that football game, right? So to me, as explosive as they are on the perimeter, the thing that makes Ohio State's offense the most dangerous when they're clicking, like what we've talked about, is when they're able to run the football. That is when they are extremely hard to stop, not when Will Howard throws for 340 yards and 3 passing touchdowns.
Yeah. And balance is the key. And it's not just balance from a run-pass standpoint, but a balance from spreading the ball around. And that's what they were able to do. Because, look, to win a championship, sometimes you need to win ugly. Ohio State did that. I mean, the score looks like a convincing win, 14 points. But as we all know, with a couple minutes left in the game, Texas is at the 1-yard line, ready to tie it 21-21. You know what I mean? But you need those kind of games, right? I mean, you need those kind of games. I think Notre Dame needed the Penn State game because there was a lot of people that said this, and I don't know that I buy it, but I think it at least deserves a conversation. So, Notre Dame maybe necessarily wasn't as locked in early against Penn State as they had been coming into games because of we beat Georgia. and because they kind of were feeling a certain way about themselves. And I didn't necessarily put a lot of stock in it because I'm like, at this point in time of the year, this team is just they know what's at stake. But when you look at how team played in the second half compared to how they played in the first half, like first half, it's like, look, they hit a wall. The magic has run out. Maybe the flu thing is legitimate. It wasn't, but you start to wonder, like, this team just doesn't have it. But when they played the way they did in the second half, faster, more physical, more focused, you're like, okay, there was clearly some lack of focus or attention to detail going. I mean, the defense taking angles on guys that we had never seen them, bad angles we haven't seen them take before. Part of it, I think, is getting used to the speed that Penn State does have, which we talked about going in at running back and tight end. And we said that Tyler Warren was kind of like the tight end version of Riley Leonard, in that you don't realize because he doesn't look fast. The way he runs, he doesn't look fast, but then he's pulling away from people, getting separation. And so I think those are aspects of it. And people say, like, they had to get caught up to the speed. I mean, kind of, but it was, they just weren't playing hard. They weren't playing focused, not playing hard. They weren't playing as physical. They weren't playing as fast. And they come out in the second half and they were a lot more locked in. Maybe it's because they just had to adjust to a different style of play. Penn State plays a more up-tempo game than Georgia had done. Their defense has got more speed than Georgia's has on the back end of the day. I mean, it could have been all those things, but you sometimes wonder, like, okay, maybe there's something to that narrative. Who knows? But I feel that Notre Dame needed that kind of win. I think if they had gone out and smacked Penn State the way that I think they could have smacked Penn State, maybe there aren't some flaws that needed to get worked out that got exposed. And I feel that way about Ohio State against Texas. I think if we were doing an Ohio State podcast, I would make the case that I think not dominating Texas the way they dominated the last two opponents is a good thing for them offensively going into this game, because they realize, hey, we do have some things we got to work out. We have a banged up offensive line that we need to still get on the same page like Notre Dame does. And so I think those things all went into it. But it goes to show, to me, Trevor, what makes these two teams the best in college football is because, as you said earlier, both teams have had to find different ways to win. Sometimes it's blowouts. Sometimes it's a low-scoring struggle. Sometimes it's a higher-scoring game. Notre Dame has had that against USC, right? Ohio State had that against Oregon, and they didn't get it done. Notre Dame did get it done. Oregon's better than USC, right? I mean, but they both had to play in that type of game. They both had to play in low-scoring slugfest. They've both had to win track meets. They've both dominated most of their opponents. And I think both of those games were good for both of these teams, because I think they both needed sort of that, what's it feel like to be in the fourth quarter of a game that's competitive? Because Notre Dame hadn't been in the game. It had been over a month on the calendar that Notre Dame was in a game in the fourth quarter that was really in doubt, because the Georgia game wasn't in doubt in the fourth quarter. The Indiana game certainly wasn't. It's really since USC, and even then, it's like at multiple times in the fourth quarter, Notre Dame held 2 to 3 touchdown leads against USC in the fourth quarter of that game. And I think they both kind of needed that a little bit.
Again, it's just another fitting poetic narrative that each of these teams got one final wake-up call before the national championship game. Because, like, we see it, right? Like, we have Ohio State fans in our chat. Obviously, there's Notre Dame fans in our chat. But everybody was kind of tossing out their score predictions and what they believed Notre Dame would win by, what they believed Ohio State would win by. Yeah, I mean, I even had my score prediction at like 31-17 Ohio State, and it was never really ever going to be that close. I said the same thing about Penn State. You saw some of the other scores that were being tossed out there in social media and things. I saw stuff that was, 38-10 Ohio State. I saw stuff that was, 34 to 14 Notre Dame. And it was kind of almost one nice final reminder of like, hey, there are still some things that you have to work on before you play the biggest games of your career, which again just adds to the magnitude of this game, man. It does.
I will say this in your defense, Trevor, because you and I had it being a game that Notre Dame was going to win by 10, and they would score late to make it a 10-point game. If they make the proper call on that interception of Jack Kaiser, Notre Dame wins that game by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think so too.
They had all the momentum in that game. Penn State was trying to bounce back, and it was, what was it, 17? Was it, what was the score at that? It was 17-10, right? That made that, or was that? It was 17-17. Was that after the Riley pick? Yes, it was after the Riley pick. So Riley throws that interception. It was the one big bad play Notre Dame had. I think if they pick Penn State off, I think Notre Dame goes down and scores and then puts that game away. I really do. But that's not how it played out. And that's kind of a good thing, is Notre Dame had to respond to some adversity that meant trailing in the fourth quarter, right? Notre Dame tied it in the fourth quarter, 24-24, and then went ahead. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame had not trailed in the fourth quarter of a football game since September 7th. That's the last time Notre Dame trailed in the fourth quarter of a football game. It was all the way back on September 7th when they lost to Northern Illinois. And they needed that, just like I think Ohio State needed to be challenged. Their offense needed to be challenged a little bit by Texas, and it was. Now, but let's get over to the other side of the ball real quick, Trev, as we finish wrapping up the Buckeyes a little bit. This is why they're here. With all due respect to their offense, this is why they're here. Number one ranked scoring defense in the country, number one total offense, number one yards per play. They rank third in rushing defense, and they rank first in rushing yard and passing defense. Notre Dame's number two. They're also second in the country in red zone defense. They're third in third down defense. They rank high in a lot of different categories, fewest touchdowns allowed. Number 6 in quarterback rating, second with fewest completions of 30 yards allowed or more. They're third in yards allowed, yards per completion. They're 6th in yards per attempt. I mean, really all year, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas have been kind of jockeying for position as the best pass defense in college football. And right now, Ohio State obviously has that mark on Notre Dame by 4.2 yards. And Notre Dame and Ohio State, as I showed, is number 6 in yards per attempt. Notre Dame is third. Ohio State is number 6 in quarterback rating on defense. Notre Dame is number 1. These are two big-time secondaries. But the reason Ohio State ranks ahead of Notre Dame in total defense is because they also dominate the run. And we'll dive into these matchups more in the next couple days and dive into it and give context to it. But the reality is, you don't need a lot of there's context in regard to how Notre Dame matches up. There's no context needed to look at it like this and say, this is a really, really good defense. I would argue it's one of, I really feel, 2 elite defenses in college football this year. With all due respect to Texas, Trevor, you've heard me say this before. Texas is really good on defense. They're probably the third best defense in college football, maybe fourth, but there's no doubt who 1 and 2 are. And it's Notre Dame and Ohio State. Pick whatever order you want. I think one of the metrics I've seen has Ohio State's defense number 1. I think the Football Power Index has Ohio State's defense number 1. I'm going to look real quick on that one. I think Notre Dame is number 1 and Ohio State's number 3. The Fermo Efficiency Index also has Notre Dame number 1 and Ohio State number 2. But they have team FEI, Ohio State's 1 and Notre Dame is 2. He had an interesting statistic in the last 17 years. The number 1 team in overall FEI has won the championship 7 out of 17 times. The team that's number 1 in defense in the FEI has won the championship 10 times in that 17-year stretch. And Notre Dame is number 1, Ohio State's number 2. Moral of the story, these are 2 of the best defenses, the 2 best defenses in college football, in my opinion. And that's why Ohio State is here, in my view, is because their defense has been elite all season. Their defense is why they didn't get upset by Nebraska. Their defense is why they didn't get upset by Penn State. Right now, their defense couldn't get a point against Michigan, so they lost that one. But they'd have lost one of those other 2 if their defense wasn't elite, in my opinion, especially the Penn State game, because they shut that Penn State offense down. First and goal, inside the 5, Penn State got nothing. You know what I mean? Like that's what this defense is. And we're in year 3 of the Jim Knowles defense, and they're reaping the same rewards that Notre Dame reaped this year on defense. The one difference is this is a far more experienced Ohio State defense than what Notre Dame has across the board. They don't have a lot of young guys. I mean, I think Caleb Downs is probably their youngest player on defense.
I think so.
Amongst their starters. And whereas Notre Dame has a lot of kids from his class playing on defense and some younger. But the point is, these guys are very good on defense. Very good on defense.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State's defense, I'm extremely high on it. Yes, their offense has Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Travion. And I get it. Like, they have, like, the shiny new toys are on offense for Ohio State. Like, I understand that. Their defense allowed over 20 points scored in 2 games this season, and they were both to Oregon. And in one of those games, Oregon scored 21, right? So, and I believe they reached 21 after the game was well in doubt, right? So this defense is legitimate. It's no shock to me that they average allowing 12.2 points per game. They're an extremely disruptive defense, so it's this defense is very legitimate. And anybody that tells you otherwise, no matter what fan base that they are affiliated with, is just wrong. Ohio State's defense is very, very, very good, and they have the numbers to back it up, right? I see a lot of single-digit numbers over there in that right-hand column in Ohio State's defense.
And Trev, we'll get into some context of who they've played and that they've played a lot of good. But that's why I love to look at efficiency numbers because those take into context the caliber of your competition. And as I said, Notre Dame, I actually thought, for some reason, I thought Ohio State was ahead of Notre Dame on the football power index, but they're not. But they're still third. Notre Dame is 1, they're 3. And they just beat the team who had the number 2 efficiency defense in college football. They just knocked out, right? I mean, that's kind of the point that I'm getting at, right? And they also beat number 4. Notre Dame beat number 6, right? And number 14. And so, they've had to play games against other elite defenses, and they outplayed those units. Penn State's defense outplayed Notre Dame's in the first half. Notre Dame's defense outplayed Penn State's in the second half, and over the course of the game, Notre Dame's defense made the stops they needed to make. Same thing in the Texas game. Texas's defense has played great. Ohio State's defense played even better and put points on the board and didn't give up a 75-yard screen pass at the end of the half. And with the game on the line, they not only made a stop, Trev, they then recovered the fumble on the stop and ran it back and put the game away. Because there's an outside chance, as much time is left on the game, that there's a small chance that Texas could have got a stop and somehow had a chance to get a late final second score. It'd have been slim, but it was a chance.
Right.
But you put the game away with that fumble return. That's finishing. And this defense has been great at finishing all year, just like Notre Dame's defense has been great at finishing in tight games. Now, we get frustrated that Notre Dame gives up garbage touchdowns against bad teams, but when I'm talking about finishing, I'm talking about finishing in the fourth quarter. The way that Ohio State did against Penn State. Penn State's got the ball inside the 5-yard line. If they score there in the final minutes of the game, it's a tie ball game. And there's enough time there for Penn State to get a stop and get the ball back to win the game. And Ohio State's offense went and iced it. But, that drive was crucial. We saw that against Nebraska. They get the late interception to ice the game against Nebraska late in the game. And that's what we saw that against Texas. And Notre Dame's defense has done the same thing with the big stops in the fourth quarter against Texas A&M. You look at the big, just putting USC away with back-to-back pick sixes, making the huge stops at the end of the game against Penn State. I mean, they've done what they need to do, just dominating Georgia really for all but one series of that game. So these are the two best teams in college football by and large because they have the two best defenses in college football. Their offenses are both good. Ohio State's I have no problem giving credit to. My issue and what I said earlier is I don't think Notre Dame's offense is getting enough respect. And Penn State found out in the second half what that offense looks like when it's on. I mean, 24 points and 261 yards and a half of football against Penn State. Right? A very good Penn State defense. Right? I mean, so I want to point out that Ohio State in 4 quarters of football against Penn State had 358 yards of offense and 20 points. Notre Dame had 261 yards of offense and actually over 300 yards of offense and 27 points in the last 31 minutes of that game. I just want to point that out. But their offenses have both been kind of up and down. Their defenses have been elite all year, except both teams had one game where they weren't on top of things. Ohio State's defense struggled against Oregon. Had a bad day, just like Notre Dame's defense had a bad day against USC. Similar teams, speed, can throw the ball down the field, quarterbacks played lights out. That's kind of I mean, Dylan Gabriel threw some throws in that first Oregon game. You're like, I don't know if you can repeat those in the next game.
No.
And that's why I picked Ohio State to win that game, and he didn't.
Yeah.
Just like Jaden Maeva made some throws in that game, you're like, if you play again next week, he's not making those throws, and this game's not close.
Right.
And so we saw that, right? And that's what I say is like week after week after week after week after week, these are the two best defenses in college football, which is, again, why these are the two best teams in college football, in my opinion. Right. But as I've said in the past, Trev, defense gets you there. Offense has got to win it. And we found that out for Notre Dame against Penn State last week. Defense got them there, but the offense had to win it. The offense had to do what they need to do to win it. And it's going to be true for Notre Dame against Ohio State as well. Your defense is great, but you're going against another great defense, which means your offense is going to have to win you this football game. And they did that against Penn. And I think the same is true for Ohio State. If they're going to beat Notre Dame, it's not going to be – I don't think it's going to be because they win 13-10. And even if they win 13-10, their offense is going to have to make more scoring plays against one of the two best defenses in college football than Notre Dame's is going to make against one of the two best defenses in college football. It's still going to come down to whose offense plays better is what it boils down to. So, and when you do look at Ohio State, Trevor, I think one of the things about this football team that we discuss is we looked at the overview, two very good coordinators, third-year defensive coordinator considered one of the best in the country, first-year offensive coordinator who's considered a great offensive mind with a lot of past success. Sound familiar? Yeah, sounds kind of familiar to me too, Trev. Where I think we see some differences with these two teams is I do believe partly because they are older, with the exception of Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, in Caleb Downs, a lot of the best players for Ohio State are veterans. And there's a lot of guys that are projected to be high draft picks and those type of things. And I think there's more brand recognition in the roster at Ohio State than we see at Notre Dame. And I think that plays into the narrative of why Ohio State's considered by more than a touchdown favorite, because people know who Jack Sawyer is. They know who Caleb Downs is. They know who Jeremiah Smith is. They know who Travion Henderson is. They don't know who Josh Burnham is. They don't know who Drake Bowen is yet. They don't know who Adon Schuler is yet. They're starting to finally learn about Leonard Moore. I mean, that's kind of the thing is, and that we're seeing is there's more of that name recognition, and the name recognition is there because the play on the field has been outstanding as well. It's not like they're just hyping up JT because he's a former 5-star recruit. They're hyping him up because he's been a dominant football player for years.
Yeah. Yeah, I was about to say they're hyping him up because he has 19 and a half tackles for loss this season. You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. Like he is.
And that production has surprised no one.
No. I mean, and so for Ohio State, like a lot of it is like confirming what a lot of the expectations were, right? Like JT Tuimoloau coming back was one of the bigger names that Ohio State had announced. One of my best friends is an Ohio State fan. Dad is a diehard Ohio State fan, and him and I were talking after last season, and he was under the impression, he's like, as long as one of the two comes back, and Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, I'll feel very confident. And I told him I feel the exact same way about Riley Mills and Howard Cross. As long as one of the two comes back, I will feel really confident about the defensive line in 2024. And all four came back.
Unfortunately, only a half of Notre Dame's guys is back.
Yeah.
For this game. And Howard Cross is not what he has been because of the injury, and Riley Mills is out. But to your point, that got him here. Those two guys played a big role in getting him here.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have dudes on either side of the ball, but I think the recognition of Ohio State's, rightfully so. I'm not saying that is a detriment, but the recognition that Ohio State has gotten with their players, I think creates the notion that Ohio State just has better players top to bottom. Mm-hmm. Right. And the thing that you love about this matchup is it's even. I think that you can sit down and divide, like, even within position groups, you know what I mean, who you would take in what situation and who's better in different aspects of their game. But I think Caleb Downs is a better tackler than Xavier Watts. I think Xavier Watts is better in coverage. Right. You know, like you can dive that granular into this matchup, which is what I think a national championship should be.
Yeah. I mean, if we were putting an all-star team together of just these two teams, you'd have two corners for one from each, and you'd have two safeties, one from each, right? You'd have maybe one Ohio State linebacker starting and one Notre Dame linebacker starting, and you can pick which one you want to have. I mean, literally, if Notre Dame's defensive line was healthy, I think Riley Mills was starting inside. I think that's the difference, though, is you'd have probably, if Howard Cross and Riley Mills were both starting, they'd be on the inside, and that's no shock at Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams, who are really good football players.
Very good, yeah.
But those are two All-American caliber kids, and then Ohio State did have the two edge players, and that's, you kind of look at it. It's like, now if you talk to some who don't cover Notre Dame or national people, they may say like Notre Dame maybe has two guys starting because they still don't know, they still don't know enough about this team. But to your point, though, that they both have outstanding players on all three levels of the defense.
Mm-hmm.
And Ohio State certainly has that. On offense, it's part of the reason that their offense has struggled is because they've had some of the similar issues that Notre Dame has had. They have had very few games where they've been able to put the same offensive line out together in consecutive games. I mean, Donovan Jackson, who was an All-American guard, started at left tackle against Penn State, and he's now starting at left tackle again because Josh Simmons is out.
Mm-hmm.
And then your transfer center, Seth McLaughlin, he's out for the year. And they're kind of putting a patchwork offensive line together. Now, this is, I think, going to be their third or fourth game in a row that they've played. Third game in a row, I think, that they've played together. Because McLaughlin got hurt did he get hurt against Michigan or the week before?
He was hurt the week before Michigan. I remember.
Before Michigan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they've had some games to kind of put it together. Notre Dame's only had a half to put their new look offensive line together, but that's a different conversation for a different day. And I think that has hurt them this year. Not like when you go back and look at when their offense has struggled, a lot of times it's because their offensive line doesn't play well. And you can say injuries, but whatever the reason, the point is it didn't play well. I don't think it played overly well against Texas, to be completely honest with you. And that's going to be the recipe for Notre Dame, and we'll talk more about that when we get down to the matchups and keys to victory. But that's been the thing that's kind of held their offense back this year, in my opinion, is when the offensive line doesn't play well, they don't run the ball, and Will Howard gets pressured. And when he gets pressured, he doesn't perform well. Which, again, is not a direct shot at Will Howard. It's true of, I say this every week, it's true of most quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a coincidence that Drew Aller struggled against Notre Dame. I keep telling people this. They're like, oh, he choked. I'm like, okay, so did Caleb Williams. So did C.J. Stroud. I mean, C.J. Stroud had one of the worst games of his career against Notre Dame. Drake May did not play very well against Notre Dame. Caleb Williams looked terrible against Notre Dame. Drew Aller looked a whole lot better against Notre Dame than Caleb Williams did last year. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you got to say, hey, that team's pretty good.
Yeah.
And part of the reason Ohio State's offense struggled against Texas is because Texas is pretty good. So this is still a talented football team at the skill positions. This game ultimately is going to come down to, can Notre Dame create havoc up front? Because that's the one weak spot for Ohio State all year. And that's big reason why their offense hasn't been as explosive as it's been in the past, is because of that. When their offensive line plays well, they rip people up, which we saw against Tennessee. Their offensive line gave Will Howard all day. And they shredded. If they wanted to run for 250 in that game, they could have easily run for 250 in that game.
Oh, sure.
They could have done whatever they wanted. They just chose to throw the ball more, and they still had some big plays. I mean, they still ran the ball well against Tennessee. I'm simply saying, like, they could have run for a lot more if they wanted to. Like, they controlled that game, and against Texas, they didn't. And the game was a lot more competitive. But that's kind of where it is. But, look, you want to beat Ohio State, it still comes down to you got to slow down the skill players. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, G. Scott will make some clutch plays. You've got Quinshon Judkins as their power runner. And then obviously Travion Henderson, which you and I have been saying for the last month of breaking down playoff games. Their offense is at its best when Travion Henderson is a focal point in it.
Yeah.
Flat out is.
Yeah.
We've seen that in the playoff.
Yeah, Travion Henderson's lightning in a bottle, dude. I mean, he's one of the players. Texas found out the hard way that he can take any time he touches the football, he can take it to the house. And Travion Henderson is so electric to watch, man. I put him up there with the Jeremiah Loves, the Jadarian Prices, the Nicholas Singletons. Like, I put them up there. I put him up there with them. Like, Katron Allen is who Ohio State wanted Quinshon Judkins to be, in my opinion. Like, I'm not saying that Quinshon Judkins is bad. It's just there is a clear, like when we were talking about the running backs in the playoffs, I think up at the top, I had Jeremiah Love and Nicholas Singleton and Jadarian Price and Travion Henderson. And quite a ways behind them, I had Quinshon Judkins, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's just, I don't think he's bad. I just don't think that he is this elite running back that people thought that he was going into the season. And I said that the second Ohio State landed him in the transfer portal. I mean, when he was in the SEC, his best performances were against teams like LSU, who had one of the worst rush defenses in all of college football last year, right? I mean, and then you saw it this season against bigger teams. I had Quinshon Judkins average like 2.1 yards per carry against Oregon the first matchup. I still think in the second matchup, he still averaged under 4 yards a carry against him. It might have been like 3.8. But Travion Henderson is a dude. Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's legit.
I want to point something out to our very confused Ohio State fan who's in the thread, who said the only reason Notre Dame's pass defense is as good as it is because they play service academy. So I went ahead and did a little statistical experiment, Trevor. So I went to this wonderful website called cfbstats.com, and I went to the pass defense category, and I went to quarterback rating. And there's this little cool thing you can do where you can kind of point out against FBS, against unranked, against ranked, against non-Power 5, and against Power 5. So I hit that Power 5 tab because the two service academies are not Power 5 teams. And lo and behold, do you know who the number one ranked team in the country is in quarterback rating for any team that played more than one game against a Power 5 team? Do you know who that number one ranked team is in Power? It's the old Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Do you know where Ohio State ranks in that category amongst teams that played, let's say, more than 3 games? They're 5th. They're very good. Notre Dame is still number 1. Like, how can you be an Ohio State fan who watched what this secondary did to Ohio State the last 2 years and come in here with that silliness? Like, there's actually a lot of Ohio State fans in this chat right now, Trev, that are actually really engaging in awesome conversation.
Yeah, they are, 100%.
But for you, sir, you are not a serious person. So if you're going to come in here, at least know what you're talking about, okay? At least know what you're talking about. And trolls don't last very long here. I'll just leave it at that. So proceed at your own risk, my friend. For the rest of you Buckeye fans having a good conversation, we love it. Thank you guys for being in here and having good football conversation. And thinking Ohio State's better than Notre Dame is not being a troll. Coming with this nonsense, that's either you're a troll or you just don't know football, and this is not the show you want to bring that to. And we're not the guys to challenge when it comes to that kind of stuff. So anyway, you can go ahead and you might want to pipe down now for a little bit. Okay. But let's get back to this game where we are giving respect to both teams because they are both in the national championship game. Defensively, I think Ohio State too is one of the biggest misnomers when you talk about Ohio State being a bought team. Their defense especially is an example of this is a homegrown team by and large. If you take Caleb Downs off Ohio State's football team, they may not have the number 2 defense in the country, but they're what, 4th, 5th, maybe? Like, I do think he's made a big difference. He's an elite player. But if you lost Davis and Nick Bignosin, I don't think their defense changes at all. Matter of fact, I actually think the other corner, I think Hancock's better than Nick Bignosin. I
do too.
Why they start him. I mean, if you have an officiating crew that calls holding, he's in trouble. Because that guy holds more than any quarterback in college football. I actually think Jordan Hancock's a better corner than David Bignosin. So if you take, and those are the only 2 transfers that start. Everybody else is a homegrown kid that starts. Now there's some backup D linemen that, as I said, Malone kid, and there's I think one other. But to me, that's what I think is true. And I know Hancock plays nickel, but I believe Hancock is who replaced Denzel Burke in the second half of the Texas game, correct? Or was it Matthews?
I think it was Matthews.
Matthews?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe that's who I'm talking about. But I thought their third corner is better than Nick Bignosin. So it's Matthews, not Hancock. Hancock's their nickel and a safety. So that's kind of how I look at it. You take Caleb Downs off, there's still a top 5 defense with guys that were recruited by Ohio State and have been developed by Jim Knowles in Ohio State. And I think that plays a big role because not only are they talented, they don't beat themselves. They're not going to give up they're not going to blow coverages like Penn State did, who their 2 corners are portal guys, first-year portal guys. They're going to make some mistakes. So I still think the defense is an example of it's still very much a homegrown team of very experienced players. I mean, their whole D-line I think all their starters are senior or older, right? Their linebackers, Sonny Styles is a junior. Cody Simon, I believe, is a 5th year. Right? Rantham's a senior. Caleb Downs is a sophomore. Denzel Burke's a senior. Igmignosin, I believe, is a junior. Very experienced football team outside of really Caleb Downs. As far as, I mean, I know like Edric Houston plays a lot. He's a rotation guy, but I'm talking about like the starters. Yeah. Guys that play the majority of snaps.
Yeah, no, Ohio State has a bunch of experience on defense. Look, like I'd even go as far to say, like, I don't really pay attention too much about the whole, like, you bought your team, you bought yours.
It's
like
the rules.
Like
you're allowed to do it.
I was about to say you're allowed to do it, 1. And 2, they're playing in the national championship. Both teams are. Like obviously, even if they, let's just say hypothetically that out of their 22 starters on offense and defense, 18 of them were from the transfer portal this year. Let's just say, which it's not, let's just say it was. The coaching staff did a good enough job with one-year players to get them to play cohesive enough to make it to the national championship.
Right. How they got here would not matter at that point in time. Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, so it's just like, yeah, I mean, let's just say even if they did, which they didn't, like they went out to the portal and addressed key needs, immediate needs for the team. And like every other team that has transfer portal players, paid them. Like, so like even to some people that are, and I'm not saying that anybody in the chat is, like, I've just seen stuff going around on Twitter and different boards and things like that, that is, well, Ohio State bought their team. Notre Dame bought their team. And it's like, I mean, yeah, and it worked. I don't think that that's as big of an insult as what some people make it out to be. You know, Clemson didn't buy their team and they got bounced in the first round of the playoffs by double digits. You know, like, I don't really think that. And you also have it on the other side. Indiana had all of their transfers and they had a great year. Clemson also had a good year. They won the ACC. They made it to the first round of the playoffs. They got an automatic bid, right? But what we see is we saw two teams who lived on either side, now for different reasons, right? Like Indiana, like, kind of had to, you know, I understand that. But you had two teams on opposite ends of the spectrum, one that just completely didn't buy their team and it was homegrown and they don't believe in nil and transfer portal. And then you had another team who had 31 transfers come in IU, and both of those teams lost in the first round of the playoffs. You know what I mean? So like, I don't think that people saying that, oh, you paid for your team. I don't think that's as like hard hitting of an insult as some might think that it is. But also, neither of it's true. Like, both teams used it and used the transfer portal the way that it was supposed to.
And the way they needed to. Indiana needed more than a couple guys. Ohio State and Notre Dame did not. They just needed to plug some holes.
Right.
And at quarterback and some other positions. So it was fun. But you look at this Ohio State team, Trev. This is a very good football team. Mm-hmm. As we said at the outset of the show, it's a very good football team. Mm-hmm. They're I don't think, as we said, no one is surprised that Ohio State's on this stage. I think maybe some people doubted they could get here after the Michigan game, understandably, just like a lot of people didn't think Notre Dame was going to get here based on the Northern Illinois game. But these are the two best teams in college football, and they've proved it all year, and I'm excited to see them match up. We're going to dive, like we did a lot of big picture stuff today. So we just kind of talked generally about the stats and the personnel. The next 2 days, we'll dive even deeper into the matchups. We'll dive more into the context of how these teams got here and put more onto, you know, why is Ohio State's pass defense really good? Is it good just because they didn't play anybody can throw the ball, or are they good because of this? We'll talk about that with Notre Dame as well. More hint, they're both good no matter what. And we'll dive into the specific matchups. We'll do a statistical breakdown. We'll dive into more of the personnel matchups. We'll talk game records. So this is just first show of the week. We go live every day at 1:00, as all you Notre Dame fans know, and we'll dive more into the specifics of these matchups over these next few days at 1 p.m. So tomorrow, as I said earlier, Trev, we're going to do the defensive matchup. We'll look at the Notre Dame defense against the Ohio State offense in a lot of different ways. We'll talk stats. We'll talk matchups. We'll talk scheme. We'll talk what we think Notre Dame is going to do, what we think Ohio State's going to do. We'll dive into all of that. On Wednesday, we'll get into the Notre Dame offense against the Ohio State defense. Similar type of thing, and keep going about it that way. So just so you guys understand, today is more of our let's intro the teams type of look. The next couple days will be more of looking at it from a standpoint of the specifics. Thursday will be, you know, why we think Notre Dame wins, what are the biggest concerns, who are the game wreckers. Friday we'll have a fun little segment at the beginning, and we'll do a buy sell hold at the end of that. And then, of course, Saturday we'll do our keys to victory and our prediction show. So that's what we got coming up. So this was intentionally bigger picture. This is intentionally more of a broad look at these teams, not a deep dive that's going to make you seem like, wow, we just watched 1 million hours of film. That stuff will come the next few days. So if you're an Ohio State fan, come on back, as Mr. Bucknuts and Archer will show. We take deep dives into these things and are going to have a lot of fun breaking this down, because there's areas where I think Notre Dame has an advantage over Ohio State. There's areas where I think Ohio State has an advantage over Notre Dame. And like every game between two good teams, how well the best part of what you do performs is going to be key. But then also in the areas where maybe you are a little bit of a disadvantage, can you hold your own and give your team a chance to win the football game? That's going to be a key for Notre Dame, obviously, as we move forward with this, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we are going to dive into some more Notre Dame specific stuff next, and we're going to talk about the portal pickups before we wrap up. We do have a few super chats that I want to get to as well, Trev. So we have not forgot about those. We'll get to those next after this little portal segment. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and of course, make sure you've signed up for our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trevor, it was a very interesting couple days. Obviously, this past week, Notre Dame got a big win on Thursday over the old Penn State Nittany Lions. Friday, we got to relax, watch the Texas-Ohio State game, and then on Saturday, a flurry of portal additions happens, which we were prepared for. Only one of those caught me by surprise this last week. We knew they were all going to happen, but one of them was a bit of a surprise. We'll talk about it. But Notre Dame added 4 new portal players to their team this past week, and we're going to talk about those here a little bit. We're going to dive into why they're at Notre Dame. Why did Notre Dame go after these players? What was the reason for targeting them? Notre Dame already had 4 portal players committed. They had Malachi Fields and Will Pauling at receiver from Virginia and Wisconsin, respectively. They'd picked up tight end Ty Washington from Arkansas and, of course, landed Devontae Smith, a nickelback from Alabama. This past week, Notre Dame added 2 defensive tackles, which they've been targeting, and Jared Dawson from Louisville. They also added Elisha Hughes from USC. They added Jalen Stroman, a safety from Virginia Tech, and then a place kicker, Noah Burnett. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through these 4 players, talk about why they were targeted, what the need was, and then we'll break down these players and how they fit into the Notre Dame system before we get to our super chats. And then the other thing is we are going to have a more detailed breakdown on the board at some point in time. I'm going to break after the season is over. I'm not going to have time to dive into film and put a film breakdown together. But when we get into the off season, I do plan on putting some film breakdowns together of the non-kicker. I'm not doing a film breakdown of a kicker. Sorry, Vince. But I will put some film breakdowns of the other portal players, and we'll do more of a big impact, an impact look at the portal players. We'll talk about the impact they're going to have. So we will have some more stuff coming down about the portal players after the season, but I did feel it was worth mentioning and just talking about them now, at least on an initial level. And at the end of the day, Trevor, we won't talk about the portal class as a whole. I just want to focus on the 4 kids that they got. These were 4 important pickups. And you needed 1 established defensive tackle. You needed 1 established defensive tackle. You'd like a safety. I don't know that I necessarily say you needed 1 per se, but you really wanted 1. And the same thing with a kicker. And you get there, and then you needed depth at defensive tackle also, and they did that. So we're going to start front to back with these portal pickups, and we'll end with the kicker. Actually, let's start with the kicker first. I'm going to give a little shout out to Vince. Let's start with the kicker first because we can kind of roll through that one very quickly. Notre Dame did pick up Noah Burnett, who is a place kicker from North Carolina. He was the Tar Heel starting place kicker the last 3 years, I believe. When I was looking at this last night, I believe he was the 22, 23, and 24. He was their primary place kicker. He went 15 of 21 in 2022 and 2024. So those 2 years, he went 15 of 21, which is solid. It's over 70%. Last year, however, he went 19 of 20. And was obviously lights out, Trevor. And when you look at that, it's like, okay, obviously Notre Dame thinks that they're going to be capable of getting that from him more consistently than maybe the 15 of 21. The 15 of 21 is still good, but he's a kid that is going to go into his final season with a 79% career field goal made percentage. He's made 49 career field goals on 62 career attempts. He's also 138 out of 140 on extra point attempts. And so he missed 1 in 02, 1 in 24. He was perfect 43 of 43 in 2023. Why go after a kicker when you just landed the number 1 kicker in the country? That's kind of a question. And the answer is this. Number 1 is he did almost no kickoffs. I think he's only kicked off like 6 times in his career. So he is a place kicker only. So you're still going to have your freshman coming in, Eric Schmidt, with a chance. He's probably going to be the kickoff guy, I would imagine, unless they decide they want to redshirt him. I would have him be your kickoff guy right away. The other kid, Noah Burnett, he's your place kicker, and he's good leg, accurate kicker, and he gives you protection in case Eric Schmidt's not ready to be your every down place kicker as a freshman. And I think that's a big key. If this year taught us anything, that Notre Dame needs 2 place kickers on the field. If your starter goes down, you're in trouble with what's come next. And I think it's protection, it's depth, but it's also give a veteran in here that we know can do the job. And then if for some reason our stud kicker beats him out, he beats him out. But this gives you a year to kind of get Eric Schmidt going. Let him be your kickoff guy maybe as a rookie. He can be your backup punter. If Rendell comes back, he can be your backup place kicker with Noah Burnett coming in unless he beats one of those guys out. And then in 2026, hopefully he's in a position to kind of maybe take over all 3, if not at least 2 of those 3. So I think this is a smart pickup. It's what we anticipated when they signed Eric Schmidt. We said, I still think they're going to at least look at veteran kickers. And if the right guy comes along, then they'd go after him. And clearly Noah Burnett from North Carolina was the right kind of guy.
Yeah, I think it was a smart move with Eric Schmidt coming in. I mean, now he's in a position. Noah Burnett's in a position now where he can kind of play the mentorship role, right? They got a transfer portal kicker in Mitch Jeter, but he didn't need that kind of, hey, let me take you under the wing thing, right? I mean, he was over, what'd you say, a 93% field goal kicker in the SEC for South Carolina. Yeah, when I watch Noah Burnett, I watch him kick. He's an accurate kicker. I don't know when fully healthy. I don't know if he's more accurate than what Mitch Jeter is. I do think he has a little bit more juice than what Mitch Jeter does. Like, he's not like a Spencer Schrader type of leg, right? Like, I not at all. But he has a little bit more juice than what Mitch Jeter has as far as, like depth of field goals, right? And his career long, I think, is 52, and he hit 2 of 4 50-yarders this season. So the first 2 50-yarders he hit in his career were this year. So, yeah, I mean, I like the pickup, man. I mean, nothing more to add there. It's just good depth for the special teams room. And like you said, if this season showed Notre Dame anything, is if their number 1 guy goes down, they need a backup.
Yep. I mean, and you're talking about a guy that's kicked in a Power 5 league too, Trevor. I think that matters. This is a guy that not necessarily just kicked on big stages because they haven't been in situations necessarily where they've needed him to kick a game-winning field goal in the national semifinal game, but they've done their homework and feel that this kid has it. And he's a North Carolina kid, not just from the University of North Carolina, but he's from North Carolina, and that state's been very good to Notre Dame. Jonathan Dorr was from the state of North Carolina, and I believe Mitch Jeter also is from the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, he's from North Carolina, went to South Carolina.
So, those are aspects of it. So they got Noah Burnett. That was obviously one of the pickups they made this weekend. He was a second-team All-ACC kicker in 2023. Solid, steady pickup. So good pickup for Notre Dame. The other pickup, let's go. We'll actually work backwards, forwards. We're in reverse of what I was originally going to do. And that is Notre Dame landed a safety from the state of Virginia named Jalen Stroman, who is the younger brother of another former Virginia Tech Hokie, Greg Stroman, who currently plays for the New York Giants. This is an important pickup, Trevor. So first of all, why look at a safety? Well, number one is because you paid attention to the 24 season as a coaching staff. And you saw that sometimes you do need to have your third string guy out there starting for you, which Notre Dame has at Viper right now. But also, they really like the young talent. I know the Notre Dame staff is super high. Obviously, Adon Schuler's a starter next year. And I know the Notre Dame coaching staff is very high on Bronte Johnson, very high on the potential for Kennedy Urlacher. Obviously, they think Jadon Blair has a chance to be special. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I mentioned a couple safeties, and I left out Luke Talich and was quickly reminded, don't forget about Luke Talich. Mr. Talich, I know his dad sometimes watches our show. It was not intentional. I was just quickly giving an example. It wasn't meant to be an extensive list of guys in the conversation. Everybody knows I love Luke Talich, but it was good to hear the person I talked to close to the program remind me, don't forget about Luke. And it's very similar to what we saw with Rod Hurd last year. It's not that the Notre Dame coaching staff didn't believe in Adon Schuler or Luke Talich or the guys that were going to compete for the job. It was, we want to make sure that we have the proper experience and depth at the position. And if a younger player beats out Rod Hurd, as Adon Schuler did, great. But keep in mind, we're going to play at least 3 safeties every game, and they'd like to play 4, is the ultimate goal of where they'd like to get to. So even if Adon Schuler starts and Jalen Stroman starts, there's still 2 safeties they're going to play. Or let's say one of the younger safeties beats out Jalen Stroman, he's still going to play a ton of snaps. And for a guy who's had some injuries in his career, he missed all but 1 game in 2024. He missed 2 games with minor injuries in 2023. Did play all year in 2022. It might be good for him to not have to play 900 snaps next season and be part of a rotation where he still gets to play a ton and make a lot of plays, but he doesn't have to play 70 snaps every game, which I think is good for him. So it's really about building depth and impact depth. Not just numbers, but impact depth. And that's what helped Notre Dame this year. I mean, look, you've got impact depth at Viper. You had Jordan Pataho and Boubacar Traore to start. They go down, got to move Josh Burnham over. Junior Chulamaka steps up. These are 2 former borderline top 100 recruits. Junior was a borderline top 100 recruit till he committed Notre Dame. Then he fell down the rankings. And then Josh Burnham was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. It's not just having bodies, it's about having quality bodies. And that's what Jalen Stroman adds. He also adds he adds more size to the position than they have right now. He's a rangy, he's taller, he's like 6'1", whereas Xavier Watts and Adon Schuler are both like 6 feet under. He's a very rangy safety. Virginia Tech asked him to primarily be an alley safety. He didn't do a ton in coverage, but he does have some coverage skill. Watching him on film, Trev, he has coverage skill. I think he'll fit this Notre Dame defense very well. There's 2 pluses you get from him compared to Rod Hurd. Rod Hurd played a little bit more football, but Jalen Stroman's played a ton of football. He's been a 2-year starter. But with Rod, he was making the transition from being a 3-year starter at nickel to safety. Jalen Stroman comes in as a safety with multi-year starting at the position. So I think that'll help with the transition a lot more than what we saw from Rod. But Rod Hurd was a very important player for Notre Dame this year. Go watch the Penn State game. I mean, Rod Hurd was really good in that game. There was a couple. What was the other game, Trev, late in the year that Rod played really well? He came off in the rotation and played. I have to go back and remember it. But
I know he had to step in and played a crucial role in the Louisville game too, because Ben Morrison went to the locker room. Christian Gray was hurt. Jordan Clark stepped in
at corner
to be the field corner, and Rod Hurd stepped in at safety, like nickel safety, because they would rotate him around. And Rod Hurd was good pickup. Yeah.
So Jalen Stroman gives you that. And then also, so you're not only losing Rod Hurd this offseason, you're losing Xavier Watts, who's one of the best safeties to ever play for Notre Dame. I mean, just flat out. Just one of the best safeties to ever suit it up for Notre Dame in their history of their program. I mean, you're 2-time All-American. You're part of one of the best teams, the team that's won more games than any Notre Dame team in history. They've played more, but still, 14-1's 14-1. That's a huge loss. You're adding a veteran presence, so you're not just relying on a bunch of guys who've never really played to completely fill out your depth chart. Now you've got some experience. Adon's played a ton of football now. Jalen Stroman's played a ton of football. And then now you can bring your younger guys along a little bit slower. And if, like Adon did, they're ready sooner than you expect, great problem to have. So I think this is a smart pickup, Trev. And I'll tell you, I like the film too. It's a good football player. It's a really good football. There's a couple highlight films if you guys want to take a look at. There's a couple highlight films floating around Twitter.
Yeah,
and it's good to see. But the all 22 film is impressive as well. This is a good athlete with some size.
Yeah,
that brings a lot to the table.
Some good size. He's a good open field tackler too. I mean, if there's one thing that jumped off the film at me, that was apparent right away. This dude loves contact. Like he looked, but it's not out of control, right? And that's where the veteran presence comes in. Like that's where it comes in that he has played a lot of football, because there are some safeties that look to go head hunting. They look for the highlight hit. And I think there is some truth to that with Stroman, but he comes in under control, flies down, fills the alley really well. He blows up a lot of plays. One of the highlights that I saw of him a lot was when they played Virginia in 2023, and him and Malachi Fields were going at it, and obviously Malachi Fields is now in South Bend. And for Anybody that knows anything about him, Malachi Fields is not a small person. So, watching Jalen Stroman hold his own against Malachi Fields is really promising.
I don't know why I found that so funny. He's not exactly a small person.
No.
Oh, that was great. That was great. No, and he fits the Notre Dame defense really well, Trev, which is one of those safeties is going to be coming downhill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look how much we saw Adon Schuler in the backfield this year, and at the line of scrimmage this year. But I also think, as you mentioned, he has the ability to play over top.
Yep.
And he has the ability to play. Now, he's been a lot of an alley box nickel kind of guy. I think at Notre Dame, he does a little bit more of everything, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm my one concern with him is, like, since he is such a good tackler, he hits pretty hard. I'm going to be interested to see what that looks like his recovery from the shoulder surgery. I don't think there's much there, but if I had a concern, it's when a guy misses an entire season and then comes back to play again. But we'll see. I mean, I don't think it'll hinder him that much, especially not from a coverage standpoint necessarily. But since he does fill the alley well, he tackles very well. It's going to be, he should be back by spring, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because he got hurt in the first game of the year.
Yep, against Vandy.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so that's the two pickups. And then the position on defense that was flat out 100% a need, in my opinion, is you needed at least one defensive tackle. And you needed a guy with some size. You needed a guy with some ability. And I definitely think they got that in Jalen Dawson. That was a pickup, Trev, that you and I have known about this one for a while. Ryan and I have talked about this one before. I was told definitively a couple weeks ago that this was, going to happen. Notre Dame, and props to the kid for trusting the process, but Jalen, and honestly, a couple of these guys, decisions have been done. They didn't just decide after the Notre Dame game. They've been done for a while, and they wanted to wait until after, as long as they could. I mean, they could. The news started to leak anyway that these kids were going to be in the class because some people started stalking the student directory, which I think is really weird, but to each their own. It had to get out now that they were coming, but they held on to it as long as they could, so that way it didn't kind of take the spotlight away from the team. But with classes starting this week, it was time to announce it. So these are good pickups, but Jared Dawson's a really good one. And folks, I'll give it to you like this: if you want to know what kind of player Jared Dawson is, I got one bit of advice for you: go watch the Notre Dame game. That might have been his best game of the season. And that's one of the things I do like about what Notre Dame does, Trevor, is they look at guys like they give a little couple bonus points, I'd say maybe is the right way of saying it, to players that they had to face. We saw this with Riley Leonard last year, where
and RJ Oben.
Yes, and the defensive staff knew how tough it was to defend Riley Leonard. The offensive staff knew how tough it was to block RJ Oben. We've seen this before with guys that they have played against. They seem to like those guys that, hey, we've gone to battle against this guy. Our players, we can ask our offensive linemen, hey, does this kid battle? Is this kid tough? Does this kid do this? This kid do that? What was it like trying to tackle Riley Leonard? I know what I see on film, but you guys tell me. And Benjamin Morrison can be like, yeah, it ain't easy. You know what I mean? So those are all aspects of it. And so that's obviously an important piece of this. And then obviously when you look at just one game, you can't only evaluate that though, because sometimes a guy just happens to have a game of his career against you. You got to look at the whole thing, and Notre Dame certainly did that. And Jared Dawson was one of their highest graded defensive linemen this year, according to Pro Football Focus. He was also very productive. I had this in the breakdown of him, Trevor. This is a really interesting stat that I found about Jared Dawson that puts into context how productive he has been at Louisville. He's part of their D-tackle rotation this past year. He played 10 games. He had a late season injury. It's not expected to be anything serious. It's not anything serious. He still finished with 6.5 tackles for loss and had 4 sacks. And you look at his career in the 3 years he was part of that D-line rotation at Louisville, he played 794 snaps the last 2 years, primarily. And in those 794 snaps, he racked up 13.5 tackles for loss and 9 sacks. Now, keep in mind that this past, or not 2 years ago, in 14 games, when you look at the number of snaps that Notre Dame's players have had, so 794 is what he had over the last 2 years. Riley Mills played 539 this year by himself. He would have been well over 600 if he didn't get hurt. He'd be about 620 at least if he doesn't get hurt. And then you look at last year and the number of snaps Howard Cross had to play last year. Howard Cross played 610 snaps last season. So that's about a season and a half-ish of what he's going to do. I don't know that Jared Dawson can play the volume that Mills and Cross can do. He's never had to. I don't know if that, but he is a very productive player in that limited time. So let me give you these numbers. Think about it. 794 snaps, 13 and a half tackles for loss, 9 sacks over the last 2 years. Over the last 2 seasons, Howard Cross has played 1,136 snaps. So that's almost 400, about 360-ish less, more than what Jared Dawson played. Howard Cross had 12 and a half tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Riley Mills over the last 2 seasons has played 1,074 snaps. He finished with 14 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. So in about 300 less snaps, he was right on par with where Riley Mills was, and he was more productive than not per snap, Trevor. I'm not talking about he was more productive per snap. I'm talking he was flat out just more productive than what Howard Cross was the last 2 years from a tackles for loss stat standpoint at Louisville. That's what you're adding to this lineup. I know there was like bigger name guys that Notre Dame was looking at. I understand that. People like some of the bigger name guys, but this is a kid that was very productive. I said the last 2 years, that was meant to be the last 3 years for him. 794 snaps the last 3 years, not the last 2. And it just goes to show that this kid, when he plays, produces. And they needed that. I wanted him to add beef. He's 6'2", 305. But he's not a just plugger that you say, hey, go 2-gap and eat up space. This is a kid that makes plays, and you need that in this defense. This defense needs guys who can make plays, whether you're the nose, whether you're the 3 technique. Yeah, you want some size. Yeah, you want some beef, but you got to make some plays. So that makes this a really, really good pickup. And I'll be honest, Trev, are there some names that would have excited the fan base more? Yeah, this kid's got great film, folks. This is a big, big pickup for Notre Dame.
Yeah, the second I saw Jared Dawson's commitment, I went and I watched the Notre Dame Louisville game from this past year. He was very good against the run against Notre Dame, which is, again, that's been some of the issue with having a smaller interior defensive line with Notre Dame this year. And I think they addressed a couple. One, they went and got a very efficient player, right? A very productive player, but it was also with size, right? I love Howard Cross. Love everything that he's given to Notre Dame. And when he's healthy and when he's at his best, he is a fantastic interior defensive lineman. Arguably, when he's at his best, he's the best interior defensive lineman that Notre Dame has. You know, going back and forth with him and Riley Mills, right? Like when they're both healthy from the sample sizes that I've seen, right? But the one thing about Howard Cross that just always gave people pause was his size. It was him being 6'1", 288. They're going out and getting a guy that's over 300 pounds, and they're pairing him with
short and stout.
Right? Yes, and they're going and pairing him with a Gabe Rubio who's also over 300 pounds. Hopefully, a more developed Armel Mukum next year that's over 300 pounds. And so they're building the depth at the right position. Again, it just goes to Notre Dame is using the portal in the correct ways, addressing the immediate needs that they have. So, you know, for me, that's really exciting.
The other detail. Now, here's one. I do not expect him to play the volume of snaps that, whether he starts or doesn't start, my understanding is they plan to use more of a rotation next year than they did this year. Where because of Gabriel Rubio being hurt to start the season, Jason Onye was more of a lower volume type of player. Donovan Heinisch is 275. Your starters had to eat more of the percentage of the snaps this year. I do expect with whoever the 4 to 5 man rotation is, I do expect a little bit more of a split next year. Like I don't think they're going to ask Gabriel Rubio to play the volume of snaps that Riley Mills played for an entire season. And that's smart for Gabriel Rubio because you don't want him wearing down. You don't want Donovan Heinisch wearing down. So you don't want Jared Dawson wearing down. So I think, and we saw that with the Notre Dame starters. I mean, Riley eventually gets hurt. Howard Cross got banged up. I mean, these guys had a lot of snaps under their belts. And that was part of what I pointed out in that number is not only to point out his production but he did his 794 over 3 years. They did their 1,000 over the last 2. That's a lot of snaps for big guys.
Yeah.
And I do expect them to be a little bit more of a rotation next year than we saw this year. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be like 50-50, but it's not going to be the heavy now. And of course, there'll be games where a guy's hot and you leave him in there because they can't block him. But I do expect more of a rotation with the group next year, and Jared Dawson will be part of that. There's no doubt about it. So big pickup for Notre Dame. The other D tackle they picked up is a more intriguing player. Because this is one that you are buying, you're basing this one off of, you're taking a bit of a gamble. And that is Elijah Hughes, who they picked up from USC. This is a guy that did not play a ton for USC this year. And honestly, Trev, a lot of his production came because of injuries. He got his first start. I think he started against Rutgers, but he played over 40 snaps against Rutgers. And the only reason he did is because of injuries. In every other game, he never played more than 18 snaps and only played 7 games all season. And a lot of him not playing was just them not using him. And part of that was he's more of a quick athletic penetrator. They want more beef up front. Different conversation for a different day. But this is a kid that only has 214 career snaps. He's also a true sophomore at USC that's played the last 2 years. So this, again, is an example of, I'm pretty sure that Jared Dawson is a graduate. I believe Noah Burnett will be a graduate. Jalen Stroman, I'm not sure of. This is a true sophomore. This is a true undergraduate pickup, which shows that Notre Dame is willing to work. Notre Dame admissions and the departments are willing to work with the football team. Bring us the right kind of student, and we'll work with you getting an undergraduate. So this is a really good sign for Notre Dame.
Yeah,
that they're getting a true sophomore to transfer in, not a guy that needs another semester. Like Riley Leonard was considered an undergrad transfer, but he was a semester away. He could just take some online classes and finish up his, you know what I mean? And do that kind of thing. And we saw obviously Bo Collins had to stay at Clemson this spring. But they were guys that were a semester away. They finished up, they graduated, and then they did graduate work at Notre Dame. This is a kid who will get 1 degree when he leaves college, and that's from Notre Dame. This isn't a graduate kid. That's a good sign for Notre Dame. So that's a different topic that he represents that's not necessarily specific to him. Let's talk about him, Trev. This is an interesting one because this is a kid that's played 214 snaps in the last 2 years. This is a kid for USC that hasn't produced a ton, although he had a really big sack against Nebraska in a close game. But this isn't a guy that you're bringing in because he's proven himself to be this great player. He's a kid that's got 12 career tackles. He's got 2.5 career tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks in 214 snaps. So why is Notre Dame going after this guy? Well, let's talk about why. Number one, just talking to some sources, they have some data on him from different camps and different things that show really high-level athleticism. He was 250, 60 pounds coming out of high school. He's up to over 290 now. He's a bigger kid, and he kept that athleticism. He was incredibly productive in high school. He had over 330 tackles, something like 90-some tackles for loss, over 30 sacks. He scored 3 defensive touchdowns at a pretty good level of football in Virginia. And again, you think USC, but Notre Dame is raiding the East Coast for players. This is a kid from USC, but he's from Virginia. Malachi Fields is from Virginia. Jalen Stroman is from Virginia. Noah Burnett is from North Carolina, right? I mean, so they're going after guys that are again, we've seen this. We've talked about this. They want to dominate the East Coast. Yeah. That's what Notre Dame is looking to do, is to dominate the East Coast when it comes to recruiting the high school level. And this is obviously, these are transfers, but it's going to help with that, in my opinion. And so they're continuing to go after that. Jared Dawson's from Tennessee, but again, that's Notre Dame's what they want to be part of their backyard. It's a state away. So they get Elijah Hughes, tons of high school production, 3-star recruit, didn't get a lot of love, but he did get offered from Miami, was a team that offered him. Obviously, USC offered him. There was a couple big schools that offered him, but he's not coming here with a ton of experience, which made, when I watch film, weird, because when I watch this kid's film, Trevor, I'm like, this kid can play.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why he didn't play more at USC. He had to have. It can't be an attitude thing, because Notre Dame wouldn't take him if he had a bad attitude. They do their homework on that stuff. This is a kid they targeted from day one when the portal opened and he jumped in. So to me, I don't know why he didn't play. I don't want to get into why, but this is a really athletic kid that you view as a sort of a 3 technique. But his one sack this year, he lined up over the tackle and beat the Nebraska left tackle off the ball and sacked Dylan Raiola. Just ran around him. This is an athletic kid, Trev, that brings more of that. He brings more of that Howard Cross style of play, but a little bit bigger frame. He's taller than Howard, a little bit longer than Howard, and he only weighs about 2 or 3 pounds more than Howard's listed weight, but he's bigger than Howard. So it's a bit of a gamble because he's not proven. But I talked to one source the other day who said, I like this kid even more than Dawson from a potential standpoint because athletically he's off the charts. And in our defense, with the coaching he's going to get here, we think he can be a player. And we'll see. We'll see what he can do. But he does bring some unique flexibility that if you want to do some odd front stuff, he can bump out over a 5 technique. But also a lot of Riley Mills had a lot of production this year slanting outside over tackles from the inside. And this kid can certainly do that. Athletically, he can do that. Now, what can he do on a full-time basis? I don't know. We're going to have to see in the spring. I'm just telling you what I was told and then telling you from watching film, this kid's got some ability. He's got some athleticism. I don't know why he didn't play more, but this kid's got some tools to work with, Trevor. And he's going to get a little bit bigger. He's only a sophomore. He'll probably end up being 295, maybe close to 300 when it's all said and done. I don't think his adding weight period is over, but he's an intriguing player. Very intriguing player.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm always down for calculated risks, right? And it sounds like this is very much of that. And it's a calculated risk at a position group where you want to continue to build depth and you wanted to continue to add that potential. And that's what he is, right? Like Hughes is a potential add. You're adding him because of his ceiling. You're adding him because of his athleticism. And to me, it's really exciting. I've watched, it was kind of hard for me to find film on him. So it was few far in between. I saw a lot of stuff from him from high school. I did see the sack against Nebraska. He's very twitchy. He's very quick off the ball. He's very long. He's very athletic. And you can tell that he still plays like he is at that 250, 260 weight, but he can hold the 290 weight well, so it's exciting, man. It's going to be fun to see what he does. Like, I think he's going to be somebody that could potentially be more impactful for Notre Dame in 2026 than he could be in 2025, but it's good depth, right? Like it's also exciting. You brought it up, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but it's exciting now that Notre Dame is adding undergraduates from the transfer portal as well. I think that bodes well for the future. So it's really, really exciting.
So you're not getting him for 1 year. You're getting him for 2.
Right.
And again, if Armo Mukum beats him out, then Armo Mukum beats him out. If Brendan Vernon, Devin Houston, Sean Sevillano, Cole Mullins beats him out, then they're going to play. That's the thing that Notre Dame showed this year is they're not going to play guys just because they got him in the portal. If somebody else beats him out, they're going to play somebody else.
Right.
And because this team wants to win. But he's a guy that they expect to come in and battle. And again, it gives you depth. It gives you depth. You want depth. You need depth. Those are very, very important things. And you need depth of athletes and some size. And so you're losing a guy that's 300 pounds and Riley Mills. You're losing a guy that's 288, listed at 288 and Howard Cross. And you're adding 2 guys that are just as big. Now, neither of these guys are as long as Riley was. They're 6'2", 6'3". Riley was 6'5" with super long arms. But mass-wise, they're bringing in a lot of mass. They're going to be a little bigger on the defensive line next year. Plus, as you mentioned, hopefully Gabriel Rubio can finally have a healthy offseason. He hasn't really had that the last couple of years. They didn't have him in the spring this past year for non-injury reasons, but then the year before he was banged up. So hopefully he can stay healthy. But this just gives you depth because you can't assume that the younger players are going to be ready to play for Notre Dame next year, just like you can't assume that Elijah Hughes is going to be able to play for you next year. But with him and the other guys, it gives you that opportunity. Of that group, at least one of those guys has to step up because you know what Donovan Heinich can give you. He's proven himself to be a legit Notre Dame caliber player for you. You know what Gabriel Rubio can give you, and you know what Jared Dawson can give you. Now, between Hughes, Mukum, Vernon, Houston, Sevillano, and Cole Mullins, and then you're also bringing in Davion Dixon to play inside. You've got a lot of bodies that have some potential. Who of that group, you just need 1 or 2 now of that group to step up. Whereas if you don't get these 2 guys, you need 2 to 3 minimum of that group to step up. And so you're protecting yourself. If those young, talented players emerge, great. It's wonderful. It's going to be beautiful for Notre Dame. But now you've ensured yourself that we have a much greater chance of having a really good interior depth chart next year, if you're looking at it from the coach's standpoint, with these additions than we would have had they not come. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's the debate the Notre Dame coaching staff is having with themselves about why they're there. And so I like the pickups. I mean, again, if you were banking your entire success on landing Elijah Hughes, I'd say, nope, don't feel good about it. But that's why it was important to get Jared Dawson, because that I do feel really good about. And if you're right about Elijah Hughes, then wow, this defensive tackle rotation is going to be really flipping good next year. If not, okay, you got those 3 veterans, but you've also got Mookum, and you've got Sevillano, and you've got Brennan Vernon, and you've got Devin Houston, and you've got Cole Mullins, and you've got Sean Sevillano, and maybe Davion Dixon, all those guys that can now compete, and hopefully one or two of those guys can step up. So I think it made a lot of sense to bring in those 2 guys, Trev. So overall, you got those 2 D tackles, you got Jalen Stroman, and you got Devontae Smith at nickel. It's pretty. I mean, you didn't need any more than that. That's like, I think they maybe looked at some edge players just in case the injured players aren't able to go, but there's nobody that moved the needle from what they already have. Because they love Logan Thomas. You at least one of Botelho and Boubacar should be back next year. You're also adding Chris Burgess, who just dominated down at the Army it's not the Army All-American Bowl anymore, but the All-American Bowl. You've got him coming in. So I think they felt good about where they are, and nobody really moved the needle at defensive end. Linebacker, they weren't touching linebacker unless it was like some Ivy League kid that wanted to just come to Notre Dame, be a part of the team, and provide depth, which they've done in the past before, for a walk-on role. Corner, they were good. I think there were some corners they explored, just for depth purposes, but they really like the growth that Carson Hobbs has shown. Carson Hobbs, I've been told, has had a really good postseason in regard to how he's practiced and prepared. They feel a lot better about him being part of the rotation next year. Obviously, you're bringing in your elite freshman class of corners next year. They showed that Bronte could play the position if they need to, but they project him still to be a safety. But the fact that he was the guy they targeted to be your next in line corner says a lot about what he's going to bring to the table at safety.
Right.
So like they didn't need a whole lot more than what they added. They needed to plug some holes, give themselves some depth, and they got that. And they got that with, 2 guys who were, really good ACC caliber football players and some of the better players. And as you mentioned, I've talked to a couple people that said Jalen Stroman was getting day 2 NFL draft picks looks coming into the season. At the very least, he was an early day 3 guy. You come to Notre Dame and you're going to get coached by Mike Mickens. What DB would not want to do that? And that's what they added. So you added some really good football players to your depth chart this last month in the transfer portal on defense. And then you throw in Devontae Smith at nickel, who's going to probably step in and be your starting nickel next year. And the defense is just going to keep on rolling next season. It really is.
Yeah. Like I said, they're addressing the needs that they have to fill. And it's really promising to see that this is a state of, like Marcus Freeman talking about the transfer portal isn't just coach speak, talking about how, you major in high school recruiting, you minor in the transfer portal. And he's staying consistent with that, which I think is, again, I'm going to keep saying it. It still feels like Marcus Freeman's new, but he's been here for 3 years. You know what I mean? But it is refreshing that when, coaches, been the head coach for 3, in South Bend for 4. It's refreshing when coach speak, for the most part, is actually true. And it's not just banter to the people that listen to him all the time. So, yeah, man, the transfer portal pickups are exciting. So I'm glad they addressed the needs that they had to.
All right, Trev. So next we're going to talk about, we're going to answer some super chats here real quick. We had 6 super chats come up. We are not doing mailbags during the season. I do think we might bring back the daily mailbags on certain days during the off season. But we'll talk about that later. But we don't do those during the season. But we do have some super chats, and I wanted to bring those up here now. And I don't want to end on a negative one, so I'm going to bring Michael S.'s super chat on at the beginning, even though it was the last one, and we'll just kind of go there. And I'm just going to start off, Trev.
Yeah, super chat from Michael S. Thank you, Michael. Ohio State commentators see this as a repeat of Georgia versus TCU, with OSU being Georgia. Why would they see this?
I have no idea. No idea.
Because of the names. It's because they want to what they want to believe. Like it's, yeah, it is what it is.
Look, I remember watching a video of these 3 Ohio State guys from a pretty prominent site standing around having a video talking about the Oregon game and how they were going to destroy Oregon and they might win by 4 touchdowns and blah, blah. And Oregon came into Columbus and smacked them. That was that Anthony Brown team that ran all over Ohio State. I just say, growing up in that state, some of the guys that cover that, some, not all, some of the guys that cover that team, they have homers. But even with that, I highly doubt that even the most homerish of homer Ohio State people are going to say that they think this is true. So I'd be curious who actually said that. And if it was actually someone who covers Ohio State or some dude that's got 3 followers on YouTube and he said it. Like, I'd want to know who said it. Because, yes, I think Ohio State, a lot of these Ohio State analysts are homers. But they didn't even pick that last year. And I'm sure they have a lot more, respect for this Notre Dame team than last year's Notre Dame team. So I would need to see who said that. Do I think most Ohio State analysts are going to think that they're going to win and win convincingly? Sure. So what? They also thought they were going to beat Michigan. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we think about Notre Dame. It's going to be decided by the Ohio State players and coaches and the Notre Dame players and coaches, not what we say and not what some Ohio State analyst says or anybody else. But I think there's a lot of homers that cover Ohio State.
Yeah.
And they don't respect other teams. I'll be shocked if anybody said anything remotely close to this.
I was about to say, look, I call this a homer take, whatever you want to say. I will bet you every dollar that I earn for the rest of my working life that Notre Dame doesn't lose by 59 points in the national championship.
I'd even bet you a steak sandwich that no Ohio State commentator that comes from anywhere prominent said that this game is going to look like Georgia and TCU. I'd want to know who said that.
Yeah.
I'd be very curious as to who said that, because I need to listen to that episode. Because if they actually said that, because there was a Georgia guy that said that. You remember? Did you see that show that somebody put on a board about that long time? Oh, it's going to be a blowout, and I'm like, I had some words for them after the show, and I usually don't do that, but that would shock me.
Yeah,
very, very much shock me if they said this.
Yeah.
So Michael S., I'd be very curious if you could tell us who said this. I'd be very appreciative, because I have a hard time believing that any Ohio State people that I know of, knowing that they're homers, would say anything like this. It would shock me very much.
Super chat from Mike Farino. Thank you, Mike. How's it going? Pretty good. Only been here a few times this year since Ohio State wasn't playing Notre Dame. Looking forward to your content this week. Should be a great game.
Mike, I'm a little disappointed in you, man, because Mike was on our show a lot this summer. He's an Ohio State fan, and he was a very good, productive member of our chat. But you know what? I don't want to hear this. They didn't play each other excuse, my man. Archer's been here all year, and he didn't leave us, even though Ohio State Notre Dame play. So, I'm a little disappointed in you, Mike. I think you should have still hung around this year, man. You'd had a lot of fun in this chat with us. But no, we appreciate you coming back, and I do appreciate your super chat. I know you've given us some before, so it's going to be. I hope it's a great game, and I'm looking forward to the content we're going to put out this next week, because my Uncle Marty already was calling me during the show. He left a voicemail. He's an Ohio State fan. I'm sure he's got some things to say, or asked me if I get him tickets. I'm like, hey, sorry, I don't make money like that. The way they're charged for these tickets, I can't afford to even get one for my parents. But I appreciate you, Mike, and I'm looking forward to this content and looking forward to the week as well.
Super chat from Andrew Gilmore. Thank you, Andrew. Do you see similarities between this game and the 2003 national championship game between Ohio State and Miami, with Notre Dame taking on the Ohio State role and Ohio State as Miami?
I don't. I mean, maybe perception-wise that some people might think that, but I don't know that anybody views Ohio State as 2002 Miami. Like, I don't know that anybody is talking about Ohio State being that. They lost 2 games in the regular season. I think people think that they're the better team. Okay, I think that people think they're going to win by a touchdown to 10 to 14 points. I don't think people thought that Miami-Ohio State game was going to be close. I mean, Miami 01 was one of the greatest teams I've ever seen. And they lost a lot from that team. Now, they still had a ton of talent coming back, but they did lose a lot of players off that team. So I don't know that anybody views it that way. I haven't heard it that way. I think that if I were to say anything about if this game was like anything, I'd say stylistically it's different. I'm just trying to think of some different games. Like I would say this is probably more viewed like the 06 Ohio State Florida matchup, where people liked that Florida team and they thought it'd be a good game, but most people thought Ohio State was going to win and probably win by 7 to 14 points. And then obviously, Ted Ginn takes that first kickoff back for a touchdown. It's like, see, told you. And then Florida went on to roll them in that game. I think that's probably more close to the perception of these two teams than Miami, Ohio State. That was over 20 years ago. I don't remember anyone thinking Ohio State had any chance in that game in 02. No chance. I think people thought Ohio State in 06 was better. I just think I think they thought Florida had a chance, but they just thought Ohio State was clearly better. That's my recollection of it. So I don't know that I would say it's similar to that. Now, I'm okay if it is. If people think Ohio State's 02 Miami and Notre Dame is 02 Ohio State, I'll take that because Ohio State won that game. But I don't think there's the gap in talent between these two teams that there was then. I don't perceived talent. But are there some similarities from the standpoint of, Craig Krenzel and Riley Leonard? There's some similarities there, style of play wise. Craig Krenzel wasn't a great thrower, really athletic kid, ran all over him. Ohio State was built around a great running game with Maurice Clarett, decent passing game, but not an elite one by any stretch of the imagination. Played great defense but I don't know that there's a whole lot of similarities outside of that between those two teams. And Miami's not – Ohio State, 2024 is not 02 Miami. They're very different teams. Very different teams. Just different era. Just no, I don't see that. Trev, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm similar with you. I hate to bring this up because I was 6 years old in 2003, so I don't remember that game if I'm just being 100% honest with you. But I do know about those early 2000s Miami's teams. And again, it's the same thing as comparing is this the next, not saying Ohio State fans are saying this, just any team in recent history that's been could this team compete with 2019 LSU? It's no, you can't. I'm sorry. That's just that is a team that we have not seen put together. And it could be I don't know if you're going to see another team that was put together like that on offense. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with that early 2000s, that 01-02 Miami team. I don't even have to remember what that game was like, to draw comparisons to a team that was put together like that. And that is, again, it's no slight to any team. That's the way that I look at it. It's almost like some people here, it's oh, you don't think we're as good as 2019 LSU, so we must suck. And it's no, live in the middle. You just aren't as good as the team that has had arguably the greatest college football offense ever put together.
The 01 Miami team had 15 first-round draft picks on it.
Yeah.
But, they were insane. I mean, this is some of Sean Taylor, Kellen Winslow, Jonathan Vilma, DJ Williams, Vernon Carey, Vince Wilfork, Andre Johnson, Jerome McDougal, Willis McGahee, William Joseph, Bryant McKinney, Jeremy Shockey, Philip Buchanan, Ed Reed, Mike Rumpf. Those are just the first-round picks.
Well,
that doesn't include Clinton Portis, Najee Harris, Kenny Dorsey at quarterback, Jamal Green, Andrew Williams. But here's the thing. After 01, they lost Bryant McKinney, Jeremy Shockey, Philip Buchanan, Ed Reed, Mike Rumpf, Clinton Portis, Najee Davenport. Those are huge losses. Now, they still had great talent, but the gap was closed a little bit just by who they lost.
Yeah.
And also, they lost Butch Jones. And you are now 2 years removed from Butch Jones in 02.
Yeah.
Because in 01, there was no way Larry Coker could screw that up. No way. He could not screw that up. 02, you're now 2 years removed. That culture is not the same as it was under Butch. And you've lost a lot of great players, and you can see why. And, of course, then Willis McGahee has that devastating knee injury in the middle of the game, which I think shook the Miami players a little bit.
Yeah.
And that factored in as well.
Well, wasn't that 01 Miami team? I've seen it all the time. That it's if their offense scored 0 points, they'd be 8-5.
Something, yeah, it was ridiculous.
Something stupid. That's insane, man.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
It was I'm actually going to go look at that. But yeah, that was a phenomenal team, dude. It was an insane team. They beat Penn State 33-7, Rutgers 61-0, Troy State 38-7, West Virginia 45-3, Temple 38-0, Boston College 18-7. They won that game on an Ed Reed return. Syracuse, they shut out 59-0. Number 11 Washington, they beat 65-7. Like,
Lord.
I mean, that year they went at Florida State and played a Florida State team that was ranked 13th, and that Florida State team that year was not that great, but they blew them out. It beat them 49-27. When they beat Syracuse late in the year, November 17th, Syracuse was ranked 15th. That was a really good Syracuse team. They finished 10-3 that season. And after losing to Miami, they went and beat a ranked Boston College team and then beat a ranked Kansas State team in a bowl game 26-3. They beat number 5 Virginia Tech on the road that year. Did that Syracuse team, and they lost 59-0. When they beat Washington, it was November 24th, and Washington was ranked 11th. So I mean, that was a really crazy good Miami.
That's so, man.
In 2002, they were still really good in 2002, but they weren't quite as dominant in 2002, in my opinion. They, again, still really, really good, but not quite as dominant. And their schedule wasn't quite as hard either. I mean, they blew out Florida early in the year, but they barely beat Florida State. That was one of the wide right games. They beat Tennessee 26-3. Wasn't a great Tennessee team. They beat Pitt 28-21. They beat Virginia Tech. They scored 56 against Virginia Tech, but gave up 45. It wasn't the same team that they were the year before. They were still elite, but they were somewhat living off of the reputation of how good the team was the year before and underestimating how important coaching is. And I think that right there might be the biggest reason why I say this is not 0-2 Miami, Florida, Ohio State, because Ryan Day, I'm not the biggest Ryan Day fan, but he's not Larry Coker, and so that would be another reason I would say no to that. It's a good thought, though. Anytime we get to talk about past great teams, it's always fun.
Super chat from Corey Rue. Thank you, Corey. In the last 3 years, Ohio State is 27-2 when scoring over 30 points, 9-4 when scoring less than 30. Notre Dame did it twice. Michigan had 62 passing yards and 121 rushing yards on 4 yards per carry and still won. What is the secret sauce?
Dominate them in the trenches. I mean, that's really it, Corey. I mean, it's. I'm not trying to be lazy about it. It's just they whooped them in the trenches. They really did, and especially this year. Now, there's reasons why they got whipped in the trenches. I think game plan was part of it this year. They stubbornly tried to be something that they're not against Michigan this year, and it cost them. I think Ohio State didn't come into this game with the same level of focus. I think this game was different than past years. You saw, and also Ohio State in the trenches was pretty banged up against Michigan this year. That played a role. It shouldn't have resulted in a loss. Just like I could say, hey, look, why did the offense struggle against Northern Illinois? Well, your whole game plan was built around your running quarterback. He got hurt in the first series, and you couldn't call run plays anymore. That's going to impact how you perform. Still have no business losing that game. Right. So that's really what it comes down to. It's just Michigan whooped them in the trenches. It's not superly complex. And by being able to put pressure on the quarterback this year, they were able to prevent Will Howard from making the throws he needed to make to allow the athleticism advantage that Ohio State very clearly had take over. And I think we could do like a very complex breakdown of why they won in the trenches schematically and things like that. But the reality is, Corey, and I appreciate your super chat, my man, is it just comes down to it really just they whooped them up front. They really whooped them. They've shut down the run and they put pressure on the quarterback. That's really what it came down to. And if Notre Dame can do that, then I think Notre Dame's got a shot to win this game. I mean, that's that, guys. I'll give you a little hint. That's going to be 2 things we talk about in the keys to victory on Saturday. Is going to be stopping the run and putting pressure on the quarterback. I mean, those are going to be big parts of this, and that's ultimately what I feel kind of did Michigan in that game. Was just they couldn't run the ball and they couldn't protect the quarterback in a way that allowed him to kind of get in any kind of rhythm in that game.
Yeah, I don't think the secret sauce is something that's earth-shattering. It's just what Notre Dame has had to do in the majority of their games to win. It's dominate in the trenches, 1, 2, have more big plays and key moments like that. Those are the two kind of differentiators. Like Notre Dame did not dominate Georgia in the trenches, but they made more key plays, and then they ended up winning by 13. Against Penn State, it was a tale of two halves. Notre Dame was getting worked in the trenches on offense and defense in the first half. Narrative changed a little bit in the second half, held them to -3 yards rushing on defense. And when they were on offense, like they rattled off 24 points in the second quarter. Or in the second half. So yeah, it's winning up front. Look, there is, I think that there's this stipulation going around with this Notre Dame Ohio State game that, like, again, Notre Dame just has to play the game of their lives and the ball has to bounce their way. They have to get lucky. Ohio State isn't focused. Like, look, this is going to be a really good game between really two great football teams. And either side now just has to go into execution mode. It's like, who prepares the best mentally and physically? Who executes the best on the field? Who makes the best coaching adjustments? This isn't some story of, Notre Dame 2020 versus Alabama 2020, where they just have to hope and pray Devontae Smith gets the yips. Like it's not like that, right? And so, Corey, I'm not saying that you were saying this with your super chat. It's just I've seen a lot of it in the chat, on social media, some of it on the boards of, what does Notre Dame have to hope and pray for to win this game? It's like, I'd execute. They have to
play your game.
Trenches. Yeah.
Play your game.
So that's where I'm at. That is where I'm at.
Yep.
Super chat from BK's Last Blood Vessel. Has there been any previous championship games where the winner was an 8+ point underdog? Just curious if this would be the first time if Notre Dame wins.
A good question. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest.
I don't know that they would win. I don't know.
What was this? Do you know what the spread was? I mean, the only one where it could be an option, I think was Michigan favored last year.
I'm not sure.
I'm curious what last year's. Washington was a 2.5 point favorite over Michigan. So that was this year. Sorry, I'm trying to find what the title game odds were. Another recent one that I would be curious about would be the Alabama-Georgia game in 2021. I'd be curious what the spread was in that game as well, because Alabama had dominated.
Michigan in the national championship the line was Michigan at -5.5.
Okay, so Michigan was favored. Looks like Georgia was favored by 6.5 in the 2021. No. That's the conference championship game. I'm looking for the national championship spread. I found stuff for the. So Georgia was still a 2.5 point favorite in the title game over Alabama, even though they beat them. So I'd have to go back and look and find it, but I'm sure that there'd be some games where, I wonder what the Alabama Clemson spread was in 2016. That'd be another one that I would want to look at. So yeah, I could go back and try to find it. I don't know it off the top of my head. It looks like Bama was no, that's the 2015. I hate when they do the 2016 title game was the 2016 spread was the 2015. I hate it. It's like, dude, it's the season that you played. Let's see here. Let's see, Alabama. What's the line in that game? Looks like for Alabama Clemson. Let's see here. Looks like the spread was. Am I saying this correctly? 6.5 was the spread for Alabama over Clemson in 2016. So yeah, that would be that. Probably the biggest spread of a team that won in the last few years. So yeah, again, I'm not a bettor, so I don't necessarily follow that stuff real closely. But it looks like you'd have to go back to that game. And what did I just say? 16 Alabama, 16. I'm pretty sure LSU was favored to beat Clemson in 19.
They were.
I think Clemson was favored to beat Alabama in 18 as well, although it was a close spread. I think Clemson was favored. I could be wrong in that one. And if Alabama was favored, it wasn't favored by much.
No, I think Clemson in 2018 was 2.5 point favorites over Bama.
Yes, that's right. You're the better. Yeah. So 17, Georgia, Bama. I don't know what that one was.
I don't remember that one.
So let's see if we can look that one up.
I will say, I don't think the spread is going to stay at 8 for this one. I think
already going down.
Come game time, I have it most likely going to 6.5 to where Ohio State would be a touchdown favorite.
Georgia looks like opened as a 4-point favorite against, or Bama opened as a 4-point favorite over Georgia in that game in 2016 or 17 championship. So yeah, I'll go. It's be interesting to go back and look. I just remember when I was a freshman in college and Denver was a big underdog to the Packers. And so that's why I've never really paid a whole lot of attention to spreads. You know what I mean? I am very curious to what that one, go back and remind myself of that one. But yeah, the Packers were 11.5-point favorites over the Broncos. So that's why in my head, I've never really cared about betting lines because I remember that one. So
yeah, I mean, spread's always fun to look at, but I mean, look, Notre Dame was 28-point favorites over Northern Illinois, and Ohio State was 24-point favorites over Michigan. Betting lines are just,
and by the day of the game, Penn State was favored to beat Notre Dame. So
yeah, half the time it's just so Vegas can get their money, right? Like, I mean, it's the reason why the line was set. Like somebody put out something about how the spread of the game was 9.5 when it opened, but then you go and look at like the Football Power Index, and it was like all of these numbers were gauging that like Ohio State or Notre Dame, either way, was like a 1.5.
Somebody asked that in the chat. They were like, "What line's 9.5?" But I think you said ESPN's indicator had Notre Dame with a 45% chance to win.
It's for money.
Exactly right.
It's for money because they know that, especially when you have two major brands like Notre Dame and Ohio State, they're playing to the bettors because, like, no disrespect, but of course Ohio State fans think they're going to win by 10. Depending on the Ohio State fan you ask, they're going to win by 35. So they're going to hammer a 9.5 line. And with Notre Dame fans, myself included, because I already put a bet on it because I knew that it was going to go down, I put on Notre Dame to cover. They've covered all 3 games in the playoffs, and I don't think Notre Dame loses this game by 10. So that's why they said it the way that they do.
I think if they did, it would be similar to how Texas lost by that way.
Yeah.
You know, where it was a close game, and then all of a sudden they have that fumble return to put it away late.
Sure.
So yeah, I found this website that has betting lines of past years. So Michigan was 4.5 last year. Georgia was 14 over TCU. Georgia was a 2.5 over Bama. Bama was an 8.5 over Ohio State in 21. LSU was 5.5. Bama was favored by 6 against Clemson. This is what this is saying in 2018, and Clemson won by.
Really?
Yeah, that's this. This is just saying. What does it say? Odds. It says. I'm trying to find. This is a website that's from the Lines. I don't know what that's called. And then Bama was favored by 4 over Georgia. Bama was favored by 6.5 the first time that Clemson beat them. See, Oregon was favored to beat Ohio State by 6. Is that accurate? Is that true? Were they favored to win that game by 6.5, and then Ohio State won by 22? So let's say the game. I hope the game's like that, Trev. I hope it turns out like that one did, but the other way around. So the underdog, touchdown underdog, wins by 20 something. That would make me it'd be good on my heart. Let's see here. LSU was favored to beat Bama by 1.5 back in 2011. They won by 21. Let's see here. Ohio State was favored. This is the one I was talking about. Ohio State was a touchdown favorite over Florida in the 06 season, and Florida won by 27. USC was a touchdown favorite over Texas. That was USC was only a 1-point favorite over Oklahoma in 04. They won 55-19. Goodness. Oklahoma was a 7-point favorite over LSU. LSU won that year. Miami was an 11.5-point favorite over Ohio State. Ohio State won that game. Florida State was a 10-point favorite over Oklahoma in 2000. And Oklahoma won that game by 11. So, yeah, we've seen this before. Florida State was a 5.5-point favorite over Tennessee. Tennessee won that game. So, yeah, it's happened. Where Georgia was a 2.5-point favorite over Bama, but won by 15. I mean, you know, this is kind of how they go. But so there. Hopefully you're able to give a little bit of that to you on that one. We got this Patrick Duffy with a super chat. Thank you, man. It's 1969 Super Bowl, Baltimore Colts, 18.5 over Joe Namath and the Jets. We've actually seen that a decent amount of times in Super Bowls, Trevor. I was actually looking at this. I was looking at a website because I was going back to find the Broncos one and trying to find some different games where, what the spreads were like. So the Broncos were 3.5 point favorites over the Redskins back in the Super Bowl where the Redskins won 42-10. Let's see here. The Packers were 11.5 point favorites over the Broncos, and the Broncos won that one. The Rams were 7 point favorites over the Titans. That turned out to be about the same. Let's see here. The Rams were 14 point favorites over the Patriots. That didn't work out so good. The Raiders were 4 point favorites over the Buccaneers. That didn't work out so good. Let's see here. Steelers were 4 point favorites over the Seahawks. They won that game. Colts, Bears. Let's see here. Patriots are 12.5 point favorites over the Giants in the first time they played. And then they were 3 point favorites the second time. The Colts were 4.5 point favorites to beat the Saints. They obviously lost that Super Bowl. The Broncos were favored to beat the Seahawks in 2013. They got killed. Still mad about that one. The Panthers, I didn't know this. The Panthers were 5 point favorites over the Broncos in 2015 and won that game because of a great defensive performance. So your quarterback makes a business decision late in the game. What a score, that stuff tends to happen. So, yeah, NFL happens. But I also think that's expected because there's usually a lot more parity in the NFL than we've seen in college football games. And there's been times where the team that played for the championship didn't belong there. Truly, like remember when Oklahoma got killed in their Big 12 title game and then still got a chance to go play for a championship, and shocker, they lost. Who saw that coming? So, yeah.
We got one final super chat from Joe Papiti. I cannot stop watching the highlights and listening to the Notre Dame radio broadcast. The 20th can't get here fast enough. Go Irish, beat Buckeyes. All family matters are settled this year.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, man, I can't get here fast enough.
Yep.
One of my best friends he's a diehard Ohio State fan. I already talked about him once in this show, so you're welcome, Craig. But we're watching the game together because we've been manifesting this one since July, and I don't know how much our wives are looking forward to us watching the game together because that should be fun and interesting. But man, it's a lot of fun. But yes, all family matters will be settled this year. Yep. I agree.
An Indy Milton fan, yes, we did. We said we were going to talk about it, and we got to it. So there you go. Did. So Trev, why don't you take us out of here, man?
Yeah, you got it. Listen, guys, thank you for being with us for the better half of 3.5 hours. We have a lot more content coming out this week leading up to the 20th. I know Brian gave a rundown of everything that we have going on, but the best way to stay in the now and to know what we have going on over here at Irish Breakdown, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know whenever we do go live. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever platform you listen to this show on, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And of course, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is to go to the premium message boards. That's where all of the good stuff happens, right? We have film breakdowns coming out, exclusive content to board members. The only way to do that is if you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. We will be back here tomorrow to start diving into this matchup at a more granular level. But until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Brian, I'm Trevor, and we will see you back here again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.